Chapter 189. The middle-aged woman shook her head and pointed at Wei Qingxian. Who I am is not important. What's important is her. Do you know how big of a commotion she caused? Daoist Master Yan Yu was surprised. Because she was near Wei Qingxian, it was normal for her to see Wei Qingshuan's astral projection. She did not expect others to see it as well. She did not expect all the martial saints and Daoist masters in the Qingyun region to see it. If it was a more powerful warrior, they would be able to sense it even if they were further away. For example, this middle-aged woman. Daoist Master Yan Yu asked subconsciously, how big of a commotion? The middle-aged woman said, I was just passing by the True Xian region. I sensed it and rushed over. Other warriors may not be able to sense it from such a distance, but the Star Marquis and Daoist masters within a radius of 10,000 miles should have sensed it. Daoist Master Yan Yu's face changed. With such a big commotion, she could not hide Wei Qingxian. With Wei Qingshuan's talent, not only would she suffer a great calamity, even the Spirit Moon sect would be in trouble. Not only that, the True Xian region was extremely vast, it had a circumference of nearly 1,000,000 miles. This middle-aged woman had passed through the True Xian region, it was unknown how far she was from the Spirit Moon sect. In the short period of time that Wei Qingshuan's astral soul had awakened, she had actually rushed to the Spirit Moon sect. The middle-aged woman saw the change in Daoist Master Yan Yu's face. You also know that it is a fool's dream for a mere 2-star Daoist master like you to protect her. If she stays here, not to mention you, even your sect will disappear. Give her to me, I will nurture her into a talent. As she spoke, the middle-aged woman took out a pill and handed it to Daoist Master Yan Yu. This is a Qinquan fortune pill. It can extend your life by 60 years and let your bones return to their golden age. You can continue to cultivate. This is my thanks to you. Daoist Master Yan Yu could not see the middle-aged woman's cultivation. Moreover, she was sure that she was at least a martial saint, or even, a king. The other party was giving her face by persuading her nicely. If he directly snatched Wei Qingxian away, there was nothing she could do. What's more, every word he said was true. As long as Wei Qingshuan's talent was known, not even the Spirit Moon sect would be able to protect her. In fact, it would bring disaster to the Spirit Moon sect. This beautiful middle-aged woman's cultivation was terrifyingly high, but she didn't try to snatch it by force. It could be seen that she didn't mean any harm to Wei Qingxian. Perhaps only someone as powerful as her could be Wei Qingshuan's backer. Reverend Yan Yu had no reason to refuse. Moreover, if she gave up Wei Qingxian, she would be able to obtain a Qinquan fortune pill. She had never heard of this pill before. However, just the two effects of extending one's life by 60 years and restoring one's foundation to its golden age were enough to prove that this Qinquan fortune pill was definitely an exceptional pill. Perhaps it wasn't just a spirit pill. It was very likely to be a profound pill. It was definitely a priceless treasure that could only be found by chance. Sage Yan Yu pondered for a moment before accepting the Qinquan fortune elixir. She asked, how should I address you, Senior? Lan, Qin, King. The beautiful middle-aged woman held Wei Qingxian in her arms and uttered word by word. Reverend Yan Yu's shoulders trembled as her heart surged. King Lan Qin. The beautiful middle-aged woman was actually a king. She had never even seen a venerable one before, but today, she saw a king. She was so excited that she couldn't speak. King Lan Qin glanced at Reverend Yan Yu. How many people know her name? Reverend Yan Yu replied, I'm the only one in the sect who knows. King Lan Qin nodded. I'll tell everyone that I've already taken her away. However, if anyone still comes to investigate, don't tell them her real name. Also, I'll give you a piece of advice. If someone from the Great Yuan dynasty comes to investigate, you'd better run as far as you can. For them, destroying a small sect is as easy as stepping on an ant. With that, King Lon Chin waved her hand. The void in front of her tore open. She stepped in and disappeared. In the next instant, King Lon Chin appeared outside the Spirit Moon sect. With a wave of her hand, she grabbed a mountain peak that was several hundred meters tall and threw it into the distance with a deafening explosion. Many martial artists of the Spirit Moon sect were dumbfounded by King Lon Chin's actions. Moving a mountain with a wave of her hand. What kind of strength was this? King Lon Chin stood in the air and drew a few lines on the ground where she had moved the mountain peak. Soon, a line of large words appeared. King Lon Chin is taking away the Virgo constellation prodigy. Every word was several meters deep into the ground and emitted a terrifying aura. Even the martial artists of the Spirit Moon sect, who were watching from afar, felt a threatening aura. From this, it could be seen that they could only look at these words from afar. They couldn't even get close. After King Lon Chin drew these words, she tore open the void again and disappeared with Wei Qingxian. Azure Cloud Mountain Range. Yixing hadn't become a martial sage yet. Naturally, he hadn't sensed Wei Qingxuan's awakening. After some questioning, he learned that young Master Jin Shan, who he had killed in Eastern Mountain City, was the grandson of the Dong Fu sect master. As for him, he had been blacklisted by the Dong Fu sect. Yixing finally understood why these 7 people knew him. They were all outer sect disciples of the Dong Fu sect. They had already sent out a distress signal. When they were about 100 meters away from the ground, Yixing pulled Chu Jingyue and jumped down from Lao Hei's back. Lao Hei had no more worries. He flapped his wings and rushed toward the winged flying snake. The snake and the eagle suddenly fought in the air. Yixing performed the wild goose cloud flight and landed safely with Chu Jingyue. After that, he immediately took out an arrow and put it on the bow. The strength of the double-winged flying snake was inferior to that of Blackie. It was only equivalent to an ordinary 2-star martial sage. However, it was poisonous and Blackie was wary of it. Therefore, the two of them were almost evenly matched. If Yixing fought the winged flying snake alone, he would not be its opponent at all. However, shooting an arrow at this time could play a decisive role. Whoosh! Just as the winged flying snake and Lao Hei were fighting fiercely, Yixing suddenly shot an arrow. With Yixing's eyesight, this arrow was naturally not wrong. It accurately shot into one of the winged flying snake's wings. The winged flying snake's wings were damaged and it had problems flying. It could not dodge in time and was viciously scratched by Lao Hei's claws. The snake's scales splashed and blood dripped. The winged flying snake was injured and did not dare to fight again. It immediately fled into the distance. Lao Hei wanted to chase after it, but Yixing called it back with a long whistle. This was the territory of second-level demonic beasts. It was not good to be too ostentatious. If he chased after the winged flying snake, it might attract other powerful demonic beasts. Therefore, it was better to chase it away. Near the winged flying snake's nest, Yixing obtained several spiritual herbs. Although these spiritual herbs had nothing to do with breaking through to the celestial vortex realm, as spiritual herbs, they were extremely precious. They could be refined into spiritual pills to improve the cultivation speed of the celestial vortex realm or detoxification spiritual pills. In the territory of second-level demonic beasts, Yixing did not dare to fly freely in the air with Lao Hei. Being attacked by the winged flying snake was a lesson. If the winged flying snake was equivalent to a 3-star martial sage, then Yixing's side would be at a disadvantage. The efficiency of searching for spiritual herbs on the ground was extremely low. After a day, except for a few spiritual herbs in the winged flying snake's nest, there was no other harvest. Early in the morning, Yixing and the others found a place to spend the night. It was a natural cave. As usual, Lao Hei guarded outside. Yixing and Chu Jingyue cultivated inside. Chu Jinghua cultivated the all-water art and continued to transform her star essence, while Yixing learned the snake coiling array. As long as he mastered the snake coiling array, he could use the array to hunt all second-level demonic beasts, which were equivalent to a first-level martial sage. After this day, Yixing's snake coiling array was 99% complete. In order to complete it in one go, Yixing did not go out to look for spiritual herbs the next day. At noon, Yixing finally mastered the snake coiling array and set it up successfully. Yixing was overjoyed. A plan to hunt demonic beasts and look for spiritual herbs formed in his mind. However, before he could carry out this plan, he suddenly felt a fluctuation of star force in the distance, which made him change his mind. Yixing looked into the distance and saw a star force light column shooting into the sky from the direction of the Kunyan mountain range. He did not know what had happened. Roll over and ask for 10 monthly votes for the Archer God. 10 votes, do you have it? Chapter 190. Yixing had never felt such a strong fluctuation of star force before. The distance between him and the star force light beam was at least 250 kilometers. Even so, he could clearly feel the fluctuation of star force coming from the star force light beam. It could be seen that the star force contained in the star force light beam was really shocking. Even though Chu Jinghua's eyesight was not as good as Yixing's, there was basically no difference between their eyesight at such a long distance. Chu Jinghua also saw the star force light beam in the distance and felt the fluctuation of star force. Then, what's going on? Chu Jinghua asked in surprise. Yixing shook his head. I don't know. Let's go and have a look. The star force light beam did not last long. After about 10 breaths, it rushed into the sky and disappeared without a trace. But the two had already memorized the approximate location of the star force light beam. They got on Lao He and flew there. At the same time, with the star force light beam as the center, warriors and demonic beasts within a radius of nearly 500 kilometers all saw the star force light beam soaring into the sky and felt the fluctuation of star force. Some powerful martial artist teams, as well as some powerful demonic beasts, were all rushing over there. Lao He was obviously the fastest. Eagles were one of the fastest birds, not to mention the black-feathered eagle, which was equivalent to a beginner martial sage. At this moment, Yixing naturally urged Lao He to fly as fast as possible. It only took them a little more than 15 minutes to reach the destination. The place where the star force light beam was located was very easy to find because the ground there had cracked, creating a canyon that was 100 meters long. Moreover, many high-level ferocious beasts were fighting to the death around the canyon. These ferocious beasts were obviously nearby and had come here first. For some reason, they were fighting to the death. Moreover, Yixing could see that there were more ferocious beasts in the distance coming this way. As for the warriors, Yixing's distance was limited, so he had not found them yet. My God, what's the reason for these ferocious beasts to fight to the death? Chu Jinghua also saw the scene beside the canyon and exclaimed. Beside the canyon, there were a few corpses of ferocious beasts. Most of the ferocious beasts had retreated after being defeated. There were still a few ferocious beasts that were still fighting. They were the strongest of the high-level ferocious beasts. Yixing sensed another wave of astral power, which originated from the cracked canyon. The reason lies in that canyon. Let's go and take a look. Yixing pointed at the canyon and had Blackie fly directly above it. When Yixing looked into the depths of the canyon, he immediately became spirited. This canyon was over 100 meters deep. There was not enough light below, so ordinary martial artists would not be able to see clearly. However, with Yixing's eyesight, he was able to see clearly. The bottom of the canyon was densely packed with star crystals. In the middle of the valley, there was a pool of milky white liquid. The source of the astral power fluctuations was this pool of milky white liquid. At the bottom of the canyon, there's a star crystal lode. It's a newly formed star crystal lode. In the center of the canyon, there's a pool of star crystal spiritual milk. Yixing looked excited and his voice was full of excitement. Star crystal lode. Star crystal spiritual milk. Chu Jinghua suddenly became excited and said excitedly, "We found a star crystal lode. If we tell the sect about it, we'll get 10,000 contribution points. The star crystal spiritual milk is the purest star power. It's enough for our cultivation to break through the star vortex realm and become a martial sage." No wonder they were so excited. Their first purpose of coming out was to find the opportunity to become a martial sage. Now, they had found the opportunity and it was right in front of them. Moreover, it came with a star crystal lode, which was worth 10,000 contribution points. It was more than 100 times more valuable than any sect mission. They immediately understood why the ominous beasts were fighting to the death here. The star crystal lode was not attractive to the ominous beasts, but the star crystal spiritual milk was enough to make a high-level ominous beast break through to become a second-level ominous beast. It was like making an ordinary martial artist break through to become a martial sage. This attraction was too strong. Yixing let Blackie land. As soon as they landed, he and Chu Jinghua jumped off Blackie's back. Several high-level ominous beast overlords who were fighting stopped fighting when they felt the aura of a second-level ominous beast. They looked fearful. However, the star crystal spiritual milk determined whether they could become second-level ominous beasts or not. Therefore, even though they were afraid of Blackie, they did not retreat but growled in a low voice. Yixing waved his hand and Blackie pounced on the high-level ominous beast overlords. He and Chu Jinghua had to get the star crystal spiritual milk. They could not let these ominous beasts have a share. High-level ominous beast overlords were still first-level ominous beasts. However, Blackie was a second-level ominous beast. These high-level ominous beast overlords were no match for it and were quickly killed by Blackie. Yixing looked into the distance and looked around. Some of the ominous beasts who rushed over saw that Blackie had killed several high-level ominous beast overlords and retreated far away. They did not dare to come over. Although the temptation of becoming a second-level ominous beast was great and worth risking their lives for, the ominous beasts did not dare to rush up when they knew they would die. "Senior Brother Yi, let's go down together and absorb the star crystal spiritual milk to break through the star vortex and become a martial sage," Chu Jinghua said excitedly. Standing at the edge of the canyon, she also saw the star crystal spiritual milk at the bottom of the canyon. Yixing waved his hand and said, "The starlight beam just now must have attracted many powerful warriors and ominous beasts. These high-level ominous beasts are just nearby ominous beasts. There may be more martial sages and second-level ominous beasts coming here. We must guard this opportunity. You go down and cultivate first. After you break through to the martial sage realm, you can go back with Blackie and report the news to the sect. I will first set up a formation around the canyon above. Once the formation is completed, I can cultivate in peace without any worries." Chu Jinghua looked surprised. When faced with the opportunity to become a martial sage, most people would only focus on cultivating first. At this time, there were very few people who were as calm as Yixing. Chu Jinghua frowned and said, "What if the star crystal spiritual milk is not enough for you to break through the star vortex after I absorb it? What should we do?" Yixing smiled and said, "You can rest assured. The star crystal spiritual milk inside is enough for both of us to break through to the star vortex realm. You go down. Not only do we have to guard the star crystal spiritual milk, but we can't let the people of the Dong Fu sect know that there is a star crystal lode below. Otherwise, the Dong Fu sect is closer to here. Once the enlightened masters of the Dong Fu sect arrive here first, the lode will be taken over by the Dong Fu sect. A star crystal lode could yield at least 100,000 star crystals or even millions of star crystals. Star crystals were indispensable for warriors to restore their star power, array masters to set up arrays, and array masters to maintain arrays. To a sect, a star crystal lode was an extremely important resource for war preparations. Although this star crystal lode was located in the Kuan-Yun mountain range, which was closer to the Dongfu sect than to the Yi Xing, must try his best to keep the lode in the hands of the falling star sect since he had discovered it first. There was only one way to keep the lode in the hands of the Yan, that was to delay the news of the star crystal lode from the Dongfu sect. If the Dongfu sect did not know that a star crystal lode had appeared in the Kuan-Yun mountain range and the formation masters of the falling star sect had already set up layers of formations around the lode, then it was obvious that the Dongfu sect would not be able to take the lode away. If the falling star sect had not taken control of the lode, the Dongfu sect would know about it and the two sects would compete. This place was closer to the Dongfu sect, so the falling star sect would not be able to fight for a long time. The Dongfu sect would have a great advantage. Therefore, what Yi Xing had to do was to block the news. He had to set up the snake coiling formation around the star crystal lode. As long as the Dongfu sect's warriors came, he would kill them one by one. If two came, he would kill them both to ensure that the news would not spread. As for Chu Jingyue, as long as her cultivation broke through to the star vortex realm, she would be responsible for sending the news back to the sect. As for her directly returning to the sect with Old Black, it was not advisable. Although this would allow the sect to receive the news faster, Yi Xing did not set up the formation. Once the demonic beasts or warriors disturbed him, he would not be able to continue. Therefore, when he was setting up the formation, Old Black had to protect him. At this time, Chu Jingyue could absorb the star crystal spiritual milk and break through the star vortex realm. After hearing Yi Xing's explanation, Chu Jingyue did not say anything more and went down the canyon. What she needed to do now was to break through to the star vortex realm as soon as possible and then return to the sect. Yi Xing asked Old Black to protect him. Any demonic beasts or warriors who came close to the canyon would be killed without mercy. Yi Xing himself was around the canyon, inscribing formation patterns and setting up the snake coiling formation. Although Yi Xing's cultivation was only at the half-step martial sage realm, the spiritual martial arts inheritance he practiced was the pure vitality technique. The strength of his celestial essence was extremely high and was not inferior to that of a one-star martial sage. It was enough for him to set up an ordinary snake coiling formation. However, in terms of the amount of celestial essence, he was far inferior to a one-star martial sage. But it did not matter. If his celestial essence was insufficient, he could recover it with star crystals. Yi Xing still had some low-grade star crystals that Gu Tianxiang had given him. Moreover, there was a star crystal lode below the canyon. Yi Xing could dig up a large pile of star crystals at any time. By constantly recovering his celestial essence with star crystals, Yi Xing could set up a large-scale snake coiling formation. Moreover, Yi Xing used the materials available and placed star crystals to inscribe the formation patterns. As long as the formation was completed, there would be an endless supply of energy. The canyon was more than 100 meters long and dozens of meters wide. If Yi Xing wanted to set up a snake coiling formation that covered the entire canyon, it would be much more difficult than setting up a small model of the snake coiling formation. Before he could even complete 1/10 of the formation, a level 2 demonic beast, Storm Leopard, which was equivalent to a one-star martial sage, came here and rushed directly toward the canyon. Fortunately, Lao He was there to protect him. He rushed up and blocked the attack, so it didn't affect Yi Xing's formation. The star crystal spiritual essence could not only help a warrior to become a martial saint or a grade 1 demonic beast to advance to a grade 2 demonic beast, but it could also increase the cultivation of a martial saint or a grade 2 demonic beast. Therefore, the storm leopard had fought with its life on the line and was killed by Lao He in the end. When Yi Xing's coiling snake formation was about 30% complete, a new problem came. This time, it was a group of 5 martial sages that had come. The following is free. Ever since that day, he had felt a stabbing pain at the lower right side of his sternum, and it had been a dull pain for the next few days. Sweat. Thinking of the sudden death of a few web authors, I felt a little scared. Thinking back to the past 2 years, I hadn't gone to the hospital for a checkup, and because I didn't exercise while writing, my update rate had always exceeded that of the masses. My body had always been in a state of fatigue. I couldn't have contracted a serious illness this time, could I? What if I got sick? Would I still have time to finish writing The Archer God? Today, I quickly went to the hospital for a checkup. Fortunately, the doctor said that it was just an inflammation of the gallbladder, nothing serious. It wasn't liver cancer like I was worried about. Thank God. This kind of mentality is really hard to describe. Brothers, please don't laugh at me. I was really worried. But now, I feel relieved. I definitely have time to finish writing The Archer God. Our Archer God Yi is about to become a martial sage. Brothers, please support me with a guaranteed monthly vote. Chapter 191. The 5 of them were inner disciples of the Dongfu sect. 2 of them were 2-star martial sages and 3 were 1-star martial sages. They rode on 5 green winged eagles. These 5 were the inner disciples that the 7 outer disciples of the Dongfu sect wanted to find to kill Yixing. Among the 2 2-star martial sages, the man was Zichuanyu and the woman was Yixi. Zichuanyu was famous in the inner disciples of the Dongfu sect because he had the ability to challenge those of a higher level. He was not only invincible among the 2-star martial sages, but he could even fight against a 3-star martial sage. Senior brother Yu, there is a canyon ahead. This should be where the star power light pillar is. Senior sister Kong, there is a black-feathered eagle and a half-step martial sage ahead. The team was led by Zichuanyu and Yixi. The 1-star martial sages reported the situation to the 2 of them. However, they did not need to report. Zichuanyu and Yixi could tell at a glance. They were still 1,000 meters away from the canyon when Blackie flew into the sky and blocked their way. In the distance, Yixing stopped inscribing runes. The 5 martial sages arrived at the same time. 2 of them were 2-star martial sages. Yixing knew that Blackie alone could not stop them. Yixing raised his hand. The spiritual inscription bow and the green sandalwood arrow appeared in his hands. He fixed his eyes on Zichuanyu and the other 4. Yixing had heard the conversation between the 7 outer disciples of the Dongfu sect that he had killed. Therefore, when he saw the 5 martial saints, he immediately guessed their identities. Friend, is this your black-feathered eagle? When Zichuanyu saw the black-feathered eagle blocking their way, he looked down at Yixing in the distance and asked. He and the other 4 martial sages were surprised. Even they did not have a martial sage level flying mount. They were riding on level 1 demonic beasts, the green winged eagles. However, Yixing was only a half-step martial sage. If the black-feathered eagle was his mount, it would be too shocking. Are you the inner disciples of the Dongfu sect? Yixing did not answer Zichuanyu's question. He said coldly, You are Zichuanyu. She is Yixi. As he spoke, Yixing glanced at Yixi. This was a woman with a very voluptuous chest. Seeing Yixing's gaze sweep over, Yixi puffed out her ample bosom and said, Little handsome, your tone is not right. How dare you speak to me and senior brother you like that? Where are you from? These 5 people had been out training for several months and had yet to return to the sect, so they did not know Yixing. Yixing sneered, I'm a dog slaughterer who specializes in killing Dongfu dogs. Yixi's face darkened. Are you a Luo Xing? Zichuanyu and the rest were filled with murderous intent. Yixing was only a half-step martial sage. It was strange for him to be with a martial saint-level black-feathered eagle. Zichuanyu and the others thought that he was a disciple of the Blood Spectre sect, so they asked him a few questions. This was because the Blood Spectre sect's Blood Spectre I could easily tame demonic beasts. The Blood Spectre sect was famous in the Green Cloud region for taming demonic beasts. They were the strongest of the 6 sects in the Green Cloud region. The Dong Fu sect and the Blood Spectre sect were allies. Now that they knew that the other party was not a disciple of the Blood Spectre sect, but a disciple of their enemy, the Zichuanyu and the others were filled with murderous intent. Kill the black-feathered eagle first, then kill that little bastard. Zichuanyu shouted as he took out a spiritual weapon. He rode the green-winged eagle and charged toward Lao He. The black-feathered eagle was very fast. Zichuanyu knew that if the black-feathered eagle carried the other party away, the 5 of them would not be able to catch up. As long as they killed the black-feathered eagle, the other party was only a half-step martial sage. With the green-winged eagle chasing after them, the other party would die. Therefore, killing the black-feathered eagle first would cut off the other party's path of survival. The other 4 martial sages also controlled the green-winged eagle and charged toward Lao He. Lao He also let out a sharp cry as the feathers on his neck stood up. He flapped his wings and stirred up a fierce wind as he charged toward the 5 martial sages. Lao He was stronger than a 2-star martial sage. The strongest of the 5 martial sages was only a 2-star martial sage. He was not afraid at all. At this moment, Yixing had already knocked an arrow on his bow and aimed at a 1-star martial sage. A 1-star martial sage who rode the green-winged eagle in the sky was a live target for Yixing. Whoosh! The green sandalwood arrow left the bow and flashed like a flowing light, making a sound as it pierced through the air. However, the arrow left the bow faster than the sound. Before the 1-star martial sage could hear the sound of the arrow piercing through the air, the green sandalwood arrow had already shot toward him. In an instant, the 1-star martial sage's expression turned into one of shock. At the same time, the other 4 martial sages were also shocked. Obviously, they did not expect Yixing's arrow to be so fast. Obviously, they had underestimated Yixing. At this moment, the other 4 martial sages had already launched their attacks toward Lao He. The 1-star martial sage who was attacked by the arrow was also about to attack Lao He. He could not resist the arrow that suddenly shot toward him. In a hurry, the 1-star martial sage could only circulate his celestial essence to form a defensive layer in front of the arrow. The defensive layer formed by the martial sage's celestial essence was almost like an iron wall for cultivators below the martial sage realm. It was basically impossible to break through. However, the result was far beyond the 1-star martial sage's expectations. Puff! The arrow easily penetrated his celestial essence defense. Then, without slowing down, it shot forward and pierced his throat. An arrow pierced the throat and killed him in one blow. The 1-star martial sage died in an instant. He fell off the back of the green-winged eagle and fell to the ground. The green-winged eagle was also shocked by Yixing's arrow. It let out a scream of fear and immediately turned around to flee. At this moment, Lao He and the other 4 martial sages clashed. The terrifying power immediately sent him flying more than 100 meters. Countless feathers fell from the void and many bloodstains appeared on his claws. Obviously, the joint attack of the 4 martial sages was extremely powerful. Lao He could not resist it. In the first round, he was repelled and injured. However, compared to the 5 martial sages, one of them had died. It was obvious that Yixing's side had the upper hand. You guys kill this beast. I'll go kill that little bastard. Zichuanyu shouted angrily. The murderous intent in his eyes was even stronger. After witnessing Yixing's archery skills, he knew that he could not allow Yixing to shoot arrows from a distance. Otherwise, the other 2 1-star martial sages would definitely be killed. Moreover, even if he and Ishii Kong were to fight with the black-feathered eagle, Yixing's sudden arrow would be impossible to guard against. The black-feathered eagle let out a scream and flapped its wings. It wanted to stop Zichuanyu. However, Ishii Kong and the other two one-star martial sages immediately attacked and the black-feathered eagle was unable to defend itself. Originally, the black-feathered eagle's strength was not much stronger than Ishii Kong. With the help of the two one-star martial sages, the strength of the two sides was already on par. Now, the black-feathered eagle was injured and could not fully display its strength. Under the attacks of Ishii Kong and the other two, it was naturally at a disadvantage and could not take care of Yixing's swoosh. 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 When Yixing saw Zichuanyu rushing over, he took out 3 arrows at the same time. One arrow after another, 3 arrows were shot consecutively. Clang! 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 However, Zichuanyu's strength was not to be underestimated. With 3 consecutive slashes, 3 flaming saber radiances were shot out and the 3 arrows were sent flying. The green-winged eagle carried Zichuanyu and rushed toward Yixing like an arrow. In a few breaths' time, they would be in front of Yixing obviously. Yixing's archery skills could not threaten Zichuanyu's strength. However, Yixing was not afraid at all. In the next moment, Yixing took out 3 more arrows. In a flash, the 3 arrows were placed on the bowstring and shot out at the same time. Whoosh! 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 3 arrows were shot at the same time. The 3 arrows were shot out at the same time. They were shot in different directions and drew 3 distorted trajectories in the void. This time, it was not the wave-stacking arrow technique but the spinning arrow technique. The spinning arrow technique was only a middle-grade martial skill. In terms of lethality, it was thousands of miles away from the wave-stacking arrow technique. However, it had its own special uses. Yixing did not intend to kill the enemy with these 3 arrows. Instead, he had another purpose. Just as Yixing had expected, Zichuanyu had already slashed his saber at him. The flaming saber radiance shot out for dozens of feet but did not touch any of the arrows. The arrows' trajectories were distorted and Zichuanyu was shocked. For a moment, he could not catch the trajectories of the 3 arrows. However, Zichuanyu was after all a powerful person. The shock only lasted for a moment before he regained his composure. The spiritual weapon in his hand, along with the flaming saber radiance, was slashed out continuously. Clang! Clang! In such a short period of time, he was able to see through the trajectories of 2 more arrows. With 2 crisp sounds, the 2 arrows were instantly sent flying. However, Yixing had shot a total of 3 arrows. Although Zichuanyu had blocked 2 of them, he had made a mistake and the flaming saber radiance hit empty air. In an instant, Zichuanyu circulated his celestial essence and covered his body with a layer of celestial essence defense. He could see that the power contained in Yixing's 3 arrows was much weaker than the previous arrows. It was impossible for them to penetrate his celestial essence defense. However, Zichuanyu did not expect that the arrow that was not blocked did not hit his body. Instead, it spun in the air and instantly hit the heart of the blue-winged eagle below him. The blue-winged eagle let out a mournful cry and suddenly fell from the sky, dead. At this time, the blue-winged eagle was still nearly 200 meters in the air. At such a height, a half-step martial sage would fall to his death even if he had a movement skill. However, Zichuanyu was not a half-step martial sage but a 2-star martial sage. He circulated his celestial essence and instantly condensed a pair of celestial essence wings on his back, slowing down the speed of his fall. Martial sages could use celestial essence to form wings and glide. Although the celestial essence wings were not strong and could not glide too far, they would not die from a height of 200 to 300 meters. Zichuanyu was furious that his mount had been killed by a half-step martial sage in a head-on battle. His eyes were almost burning with flames. Thief! I will tear you into pieces. Zichuanyu let out a roar that shook the sky. Holding the spiritual weapon with both hands, with a terrifying flaming saber radiance, he slashed down at Yixing from above. Chapter 192. Wild Goose Cloud Sword. Yixing dared not touch Sichuanyu's flaming saber radiance. He activated his lightness skill to the maximum and merged it with the wind to retreat. Yixing's Qinggong of the transcendent state was already extremely fast. Coupled with the addition of the wind, Yixing's speed reached a terrifying level in an instant. The flaming saber radiance missed and created a 10-meter-long crack on the ground. The ground was charred black. Sichuanyu was surprised that Yixing was able to dodge his attack. However, he snorted coldly in his heart. In his opinion, Yixing's light body technique was indeed extraordinary. Perhaps he could dodge one or two of his attacks, but the speed of his attacks had to be faster than the speed of his opponent's dodging. It could be done once, but not thrice. He did not think that Yixing could dodge 3 attacks from him. "I'll chop your head off in 3 attacks." Sichuanyu held the spiritual weapon saber with both hands and shouted angrily. He rushed toward Yixing. However, Yixing, who was not far away, did not dodge at all. Instead, he looked at Sichuanyu with disdain. At this moment, the void around Sichuanyu twisted. Suddenly, several astral snakes appeared and pounced on Sichuanyu at the same time. It was a level 2 array, the coiling snake array. Yixing knew that he was no match for Sichuanyu. As he dodged, he took out the coiling snake array disc that Gu Tianxiang had given him. Although it was an ordinary level 2 array disc, it was enough to kill a beginner martial sage. The sudden appearance of the Star Force snakes was beyond Sichuanyu's expectation. He was shocked. The spiritual weapon saber in his hand slashed out a flaming saber screen and slashed in all directions. Bang! 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 A series of explosions sounded. The Star Force snakes were not cut by Sichuanyu's flaming saber radiance. Instead, Sichuanyu was pushed back by the counterforce. A level 2 array disc. Sichuanyu was shocked and shocked. He had never imagined that Yixing, a half-step martial sage, would have a rank 2 array disc. This item was extremely rare and even the inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect would find it difficult to obtain it. Formation discs were the weakest formations of the same level. An ordinary grade 2 snake coiling formation disc could not kill a 3-star martial saint, but it was more than enough to kill a 1-star or 2-star martial saint. Although Sichuanyu's strength was comparable to a 3-star martial saint's, he was still inferior to a 3-star martial saint in a life-and-death battle. Therefore, Sichuanyu was at a disadvantage in the coiling snake array activated by the array disc and was repelled by the star power serpent. However, Sichuanyu's strength was comparable to a 3-star martial saint. It would not be easy for the coiling snake array to kill him. Seeing that Sichuanyu was blocked by the coiling snake formation, the corners of Yixing's mouth curled up. He knocked an arrow on his bow and pointed it at a 1-star martial saint who was fighting fiercely with Lao He in the distance. "Stop!" In the coiling snake array, Sichuanyu shouted angrily, "If you dare to harm my Dong Fu sect's disciple again, I will make you beg for death." Sichuanyu knew that with the archery skills Yixing had just displayed, it would not be difficult for him to kill a 1-star martial saint. Yixing glanced at Sichuanyu and said, "Don't worry, it will be your turn later." Then, with a whoosh, the arrow left the bowstring. The 15 stacked forces blue sandalwood arrow was extremely powerful. Even a 2-star martial saint would be severely injured if he was not killed by it. Clang! The result was obvious. The arrow shook off the weapon in the 1-star martial saint's hand and shot into his chest. Because of the weapon's obstruction, the arrow did not hit any vital parts. However, the arrow piercing through the chest was still a serious injury. How sharp were the eagle's eyes! Seeing that the 1-star martial saint was injured, Lao He attacked him with his claws. The injured one-star martial saint almost fell off the back of the blue-winged eagle after being hit by the arrow. How could he resist Lao Hei's claws? His head was instantly scratched open and he died. As he killed the one-star martial saint with one claw, Lao Hei was also attacked by Yi Shi and another one-star martial saint. The demonic beast's body was huge and its vitality was tenacious. Lao Hei was only slightly injured after being attacked by the two. Lao Hei was at a disadvantage when fighting 1 against 3. Now that he had killed a one-star martial saint, the pressure on him was greatly reduced and he was about to turn the tables. At this time, Yi Xing took out a blue sandalwood arrow from afar. He knocked the arrow on his bow and aimed at the only one-star martial saint alive. "Bastard, you are courting death. I will break your bones inch by inch and let you die a horrible death." In the coiling snake formation, Zichuanyu saw that another junior martial brother was killed by Yi Xing. He roared furiously and waved his spiritual weapon, attacking the star power snakes crazily. Unfortunately, although it was difficult for the coiling snake formation to kill him, he was far from being able to break the coiling snake formation. No matter how hard he tried, he was repelled by the star power snakes and could not escape. Whoosh! The arrow pierced through the air with a loud sound. The only one-star martial saint alive was suppressed by Lao Hei's counterattack and could not escape from Yi Xing's arrow. He was shot in the heart by Yi Xing and died instantly. 3 one-star martial saints died one after another. Zichuanyu was trapped in the coiling snake formation and Yi Shi was scared out of her wits. She did not dare to fight with Lao Hei and controlled the blue-winged eagle to escape. The blue-winged eagle's speed was much slower than Lao Hei's. Lao Hei flapped his wings and chased after Zichuanyu. Yi Shi was shocked. She jumped down from the blue-winged eagle and survived. However, the blue-winged eagle was caught by Lao Hei's claw. Lao Hei's other claw followed and the eagle's beak pecked down. The blue-winged eagle was killed by Lao Hei's storm-like attack. A pair of celestial essence wings appeared on Yi Shi's back. After landing on the ground, she didn't try to escape. Instead, she rushed towards Yi Xing. As she flew, Yi Shi tore her clothes. Her plump breasts suddenly popped out and jiggled. "Young master, please spare my life." Yi Shi almost tore off all her clothes. As she tore, she shouted, "Don't kill me. I'll give you everything. My skills are superb. I'll definitely serve you well. Don't kill me. Yi Shi, you bitch, how dare you beg for mercy from this bastard?" Zichuanyu, who was in the coiling snake formation, was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He was one of Yi Shi's gigolos. Yi Xing's eyes narrowed. He did not see Yi Shi's naked body. Instead, he saw the figures of Wan Xingliang, Lu Qin, and Yang Yun, his 3 dead comrades. Yi Xing was unmoved by Yi Shi's begging. With a whoosh, the arrow in his hand burst out. At the same time, Lao Hei in the air also threw the blue-winged eagle's body and swooped down from the sky. He grabbed Yi Shi's head with his sharp claws. For Lao Hei, no matter how naked Yi Shi was, she was not attractive at all. If Yi Shi resisted with all her strength, she might be able to hold on for a few breaths under the joint attack of Yi Xing and Lao Hei. But now, she took off her clothes and ran naked. How could she resist the joint attack of Yi Xing and Lao Hei? She died in an instant. "Ah!" Zichuanyu roared. Although he was angry that Yi Shi had begged for mercy, he was even more furious that Yi Shi was killed. Under such circumstances, Zichuanyu's potential was stimulated. He was able to exert almost 120% of his strength. There was a faint sign that he was going to break the coiling snake formation. "It's your turn now." Seeing this, Yi Xing took out 3 blue sandalwood arrows without hesitation. He performed the wave-stacking arrow technique and shot 3 arrows at Zichuanyu. Clang! 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 Zichuanyu was locked in a fierce battle with the coiling snake formation when he was suddenly attacked by Yixing's arrows. Although he managed to block the 3 arrows with his saber, he was still unable to focus on one thing. In the blink of an eye, Zichuanyu was hit by 2 Star Force snakes. He spat out blood and fell to the ground. The next moment, several Star Force snakes swarmed over Zichuanyu. In the blink of an eye, Zichuanyu was turned into a corpse. Yixing and Lao He worked together and used the coiling snake formation disc that Gu Tianshang had given him. Finally, they killed all 5 of the Dong Fu sect's inner disciples and kept the news of the star crystal load under control. Yixing did not have time to search for Zichuanyu and the other 4. He threw a supreme spiritual herb with healing effects to Lao He and immediately began to engrave the formation inscriptions. He knew that Zichuanyu and the other 4 would not be their final opponents. There might be more powerful martial artists or demonic beasts. Without the coiling snake formation, he would not be able to fend off the enemies. He would not have time to absorb the star crystal spiritual milk to break through the stellar vortex and become a martial sage. However, Yixing did not expect that the Dong Fu sect would be informed of Zichuanyu's death the moment he died. Chapter 193. Zichuanyu was one of the famous geniuses among the inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect. He was the focus of the Dong Fu sect. The Dong Fu sect attached great importance to each of its disciples, especially their life and death. The array masters of the sect had engraved an array that could detect their life aura. If they died, their life aura would disappear and the array would collapse. Once the array collapsed, the array flags in the hands of the array masters of the sect would shatter. The array masters could determine who had died based on the broken array flags. Once Zichuanyu died, the array that could detect his life aura collapsed. The array in the hands of the array masters of the sect that was connected to the array on Zichuanyu's body also shattered. Therefore, the array masters knew that Zichuanyu was dead. The death of an inner disciple was not a small matter. The Dong Fu sect wanted to know the cause of Zichuanyu's death and immediately started an investigation. The Dong Fu sect did not know the exact location of Zichuanyu's death. They only knew that Zichuanyu, Ishii Kong, and the other 4 had entered the Blue Cloud Mountains to train. Therefore, the Dong Fu sect could only send people to the Blue Cloud Mountains to investigate. The focus of the investigation was the area where Zichuanyu and the other 4 had been. They also had to investigate the area within 1,000 miles. A perfected being elder led the team, which included core disciples, disciples of the human sect, and deacons. There were more than 10 martial saints who entered the Blue Cloud Mountains. The area where Zichuanyu and the other 4 had been training was deeper in the Blue Cloud Mountains. It was an area where level 2 demonic beasts, which were equivalent to beginner martial saints, lived. It was the focus of the Dong Fu sect's investigation. The perfected being elder and some martial saints with high cultivation went there to investigate. As for the Kunyan mountain range, there were usually only high-level ferocious beasts. Only level 2 demonic beasts would occasionally appear. Most of the warriors who trained there were below the martial sage realm. It was one of the areas that the Dongfu sect neglected. The deacons and core disciples of the sect did not plan to go to the Blue Cloud Mountains. In the end, under the arrangement of the perfected being elder, Du Bianqing, an inner disciple, led a team to the Blue Cloud Mountains to investigate. Du Bianqing wasn't an ordinary inner disciple. He was the #1 inner disciple of the Dongfu sect. Like Zichuanyu, he was also one of the top inner disciples of the Dongfu sect. Moreover, even though they were both key candidates, the extent of their training was different. In terms of talent, Du Bianqing was far more talented than Zichuanyu. Whether it was in terms of cultivation speed or aptitude, Du Bian's city was far superior to Zichuanyu. Zichuanyu was a 7-star martial saint, Tianming. He became a martial saint at the age of 18, and a 2-star martial saint at the age of 19 and a half. He was 20 years old this year, and his cultivation was at the peak of the 2nd level of the astral vortex realm. His battle prowess was comparable to a 3-star martial saint. Du Biancheng was a 9-star martial saint, Tianming. He became a martial saint at the age of 16 and a half, a 2-star martial saint at the age of 17, and a 3-star martial saint at the age of 18. He was 19 this year, and his cultivation was at the peak of the 3rd level of the astral vortex realm. He had defeated a 4-star martial saint before. The difference between a level 3 martial saint and a level 4 martial saint was the difference between a beginner martial saint and a middle martial saint. However, Du Biancheng was able to defeat someone of a higher level than him. In terms of combat prowess, Du Biancheng was also far superior to Zichuanyu. When Du Biancheng was a 2-star martial sage, he could almost defeat a 3-star martial sage. Compared to Zichuanyu, who could only contend with a 3-star martial sage, the difference between them was obvious. In the Dongfu sect, Du Biancheng was known as the number 2 genius among the disciples. Du Biancheng's identity was also extraordinary. He was the nephew of the Dongfu sect master, Du Bianxiong. His father was the perfected being elder of the Dongfu sect, Du Bianing. He was the perfected being elder who was investigating Zichuanyu's death. The reason why Du Bianing sent his son to the Blue Cloud Mountains was because he felt that the Blue Cloud Mountains should be safe. With Du Biancheng's strength, the Blue Cloud Mountains should be safe. The Blue Cloud Mountains. Yixing constantly used star crystals to recover his star essence. He maintained the speed of engraving the runes without slowing down or stopping. Today, Yixing felt very different when he was arranging the coiling snake array. Due to the sense of urgency in his heart, his mind was focused like never before. This was a level that was impossible to achieve under normal circumstances. This caused Yixing to increase the speed at which he set up the formation. Furthermore, his proficiency in formations also improved much faster than when he practiced in the past. Since Zichuanyu and the others were killed, the number of fierce beasts that rushed over had decreased. Most of the fierce beasts had turned around and left before they could reach here. Beasts had a keen sense of smell. Obviously, they knew that experts had died near the canyon and did not dare to come over. It was not until Yixing's coiling snake array was more than 50% complete, covering more than half of the canyon, that another strong enemy came. It was a level 2 demonic beast. As the saying goes, enemies meet on a narrow road. This was really true. The level 2 demonic beast that came was the winged flying snake that had fought with Old Hay yesterday. At that time, the winged flying snake was hit by Yixing's arrow and fled far away. Yixing did not let Old Hay chase after it. Now that a day had passed, the winged flying snake's injuries had healed. It had also sensed the aura of the star crystal spiritual milk and rushed here. When enemies met, their eyes would turn red. Old Hay and the winged flying snake fought as soon as they met. Yixing saw that the winged flying snake's injuries did not seem to have fully recovered. Old Hay could resist it, so he ignored it and focused on engraving the array runes. He wanted to complete the coiling snake array as soon as possible. As long as the coiling snake array was completed, Yixing would not care about an elementary martial sage. Although the coiling snake formation that Yixing had set up was an ordinary level 2 formation, it was a formation in the form of a formation base. As a level 2 formation, it was the strongest existence. It was far from comparable to the level 2 coiling snake formation in the form of a formation disc. It would not be difficult to kill a 3-star martial saint. This time, the winged flying snake and Old Hay fought fiercely for almost an hour before it was injured by Old Hay's claws. The new injury caused the old injury to flare up. With injuries on top of injuries, it fled again. During the battle between Old Hay and the winged flying snake, a team of 4 below the martial sage realm had come here. They observed from afar and chose to retreat, leaving far away. When the winged flying snake was defeated and left, Yixing's coiling snake array was 80% complete. It surrounded more than half of the canyon. When the coiling snake array was 90% complete, Yixing suddenly felt a fluctuation of star energy in the sky above the canyon. The scene above the canyon suddenly changed, turning into a starry sky. Among them, a star lit up and gradually grew bigger. It was a blue star. 80% of the star was endless water, forming a vast ocean. Yixing instantly realized that this was the awakening of astrology. Chu Jingyue had reached the last step of breaking through to the star vortex realm. As long as astrology was awakened, the starlight cluster compressed by the 9 star rings in the dantian would rotate and form a starlight vortex. Then, one would step into the star vortex realm and be called a martial sage. No wonder junior martial sister Chu was able to cultivate water attribute martial arts so easily. So it turns out that her astrology is a water attribute star. Yixing muttered to himself as he looked at the vast ocean of blue stars. Chu Jingyue's astrology was not awakened for long. In less than a quarter of an hour, it was completed. The illusion of astrology disappeared. At this time, Yixing had finished engraving the last array pattern. The coiling snake array was finally completed, covering the entire canyon. Now, we don't have to worry about others snatching the star crystal spiritual milk, unless they are mid-level martial sages or second-level demonic beasts equivalent to mid-level martial sages. Yixing thought. Below the canyon, in the space between Chu Jingyue's eyebrows, a blue water-based star was suspended in the starry sky. The starlight cluster in the dantian also slowly rotated the moment the astrology entered her body. Under the influence of the water-based astrology, Chu Jingyue's star vortex looked like a water vortex. After breaking through to the star vortex realm, Chu Jingyue stopped cultivating. Seeing that less than 1/3 of the star crystal spiritual milk in the pool had been consumed, she breathed a sigh of relief. After becoming a martial sage, Chu Jingyue was in a good mood. She soon came to the top of the canyon. "Senior brother Yi, it's time for you to cultivate. Have you finished setting up the array?" "Congratulations, junior sister Chu." Yixing nodded and congratulated Chu Jingyue. "There's no time to lose. Junior sister Chu, return to the sect on Old Black immediately and report the news. Oh, when you pass by Zishan County, inform Zishan Ho first." "Okay. Senior brother Yi, be careful." Chu Jingyue knew that the most important thing now was to report the news to the sect. She did not refuse and left on Old Black. With the coiling snake array, Yixing was no longer worried and came to the bottom of the canyon. It's been 3 days, but the monthly votes have not exceeded 200. What a tragedy. I hope to see the Archer God's monthly votes exceed 200 tomorrow. Otherwise, I will have to write a single chapter and beg desperately. I don't want to write a single chapter all the time, but if I don't write a single chapter, the brothers will not vote. Brother, do you vote? Chapter 194. At the bottom of the canyon, Yixing stood beside the star crystal spiritual milk, feeling very happy. After paying so much, it was finally time to reap the rewards. 2/3 of the star crystal spiritual milk was left in the pool, which was more than enough for him to become a martial saint. Yixing sat cross-legged beside the pool of star crystal spiritual milk. He quickly adjusted his state of mind, calmed his mind, and began to cultivate the pure yuan technique, absorbing the star crystal spiritual milk. Star crystal spiritual milk was the purest star power, which could be directly absorbed to improve one's cultivation without any impurities or side effects. The process of a martial artist breaking through to the star vortex realm and becoming a martial saint was to accumulate the power of the stars. This was a long process, but with the help of the star crystal spiritual milk, this long process could be shortened to a very short period of time. As Yixing cultivated the pure yuan technique, the star crystal spiritual milk in the pool was attracted by an invisible force, turning into a pure white qi flow and drilling into Yixing's body. Yixing's cultivation increased at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yixing had never experienced such a fast cultivation speed. His star essence conversion soon reached 50%. 50% conversion of celestial essence was the limit of a half-step martial saint. After that, Yixing cultivated the pure essence art. Although his inner strength could no longer be converted into celestial essence, the 9 star rings in his dantian gradually became brighter and brighter. When the 9 star rings shone to the extreme, they began to compress. For a martial artist with a low heaven's fate realm cultivation, this was an extremely difficult process, but Yixing was now doing it naturally. This had something to do with his astrology, but the star crystal spiritual milk was the main reason. Wisps of pure white qi flow flew out of the star crystal spiritual milk and were absorbed by Yixing's body. The 9 star rings in his dantian continued to compress, getting closer and closer. Soon, the 9 star rings would compress into a ball of starlight. At that time, he would usher in the final step of breaking through to the star vortex realm, which was also the most important step for martial artists, astrology awakening. That pillar of star force must have come from that canyon. There must be treasures inside. Senior Brother Gu, why did we retreat? Senior Brother Gu, you've cultivated the blood ghost eye, which can interfere with the thoughts of Class 2 demonic beasts. That black-feathered eagle and the winged flying snake are ordinary Class 2 demonic beasts, they can't threaten us. When Old Black and the winged flying snake's winged snake, the 4 martial artists who had appeared in the distance. Gu Yang was the main disciple of the Gu clan, which controlled the Blood Spectre sect. That was why he was able to cultivate the Blood Spectre eye when he was only a half-step martial saint. The Blood Ghost Eye of the Blood Ghost sect was very effective in controlling demonic beasts. Gu Youyang's Blood Ghost Eye had not reached the level of controlling demonic beasts, but it could influence the thoughts of demonic beasts. He could protect himself against demonic beasts. Gu Youyang was 17 or 18 years old, but he looked very mature. He sat on the back of the most powerful blue-winged eagle among the 4. He glanced at the 3 9th-level martial artists and said, "Let's go. Because I've cultivated the Blood Ghost Eye, my eyesight is stronger than yours. That's why I had to retreat." There are not only corpses of fierce beasts around the canyon, but also the corpses of 5 martial saints in the grass. If we go there, there will only be one result, and that is death. What? Corpses of 5 martial saints. How is this possible? Could it be that those 5 martial saints couldn't even escape? Martial saints appeared in the Kuinyun mountain range. Which country's martial saints are they from? The 3 martial artists of LV9 exclaimed. Gu Youyang said, 2 of the martial saints were killed by arrows. As for the other 3, their deaths should also be related to arrows. You all ignored the young man who set up the formation beside the canyon. Although he is only a half-step martial saint, the arrow that killed the martial saints must have something to do with him. The 3 martial artists of LV9 were shocked. A half-step martial saint could kill a martial saint with arrows. This was absolutely shocking. Gu Youyang continued, I know one of the 5 dead martial saints. He's Zi Chuanyu, an inner disciple of the Falling Star sect. He came to the Blood Ghost sect before. Zi Chuanyu. I've heard of him. He's an inner disciple of the Dong Fu sect. How could he die here? One of the martial artists of LV9 exclaimed. The Dong Fu sect is an ally of the Blood Ghost sect. Shouldn't we tell them about Zi Chuanyu's death? That's right. We're close to the Dong Fu sect. It won't take us more than a few hours on the Green Wind Eagles. The other 2 martial artists of LV9 agreed. Gu Yuyang nodded and agreed with the proposal. Thus, the four of them flew in the direction of the Dong Fu sect. Before they left the Kuan-Yun mountain range, they bumped into Du Bianqing and the others who had come to investigate. Du Bianqing was the #1 inner disciple of the Dong Fu sect. He was much more famous than Zichuanyu, so Gu Yuyang naturally knew him. Senior brother Du Bianqing. Gu Yuyang waved and shouted when he saw Du Bianqing and the others. You are. Du Bianqing was also riding on a green wind eagle. Gu Yuyang knew him, but he did not know Gu Yuyang. The other four inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect were riding on 2 green wind eagles. They all looked at Gu Yuyang. Gu Yuyang controlled the green wind eagle and quickly arrived in front of Du Bianqing and the others. He said, I'm Gu Yuyang, the #1 outer disciple of the Blood Ghost sect. I saw the corpse of your inner disciple, Zichuanyu, in the Kuan-Yun mountain range. I'm on my way to inform you. The inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect were shocked. Du Bianqing's eyes flashed and he raised his eyebrows. What? Junior brother, you died in the Kuan-Yun mountain range. That's right. Gu Yuyang nodded and told them what he had seen near the canyon. Du Bianqing heard that there was only a half-step martial sage setting up the formation and 2 ordinary LV2 demonic beasts fighting. He immediately waved his hand and shouted, let's go and see who killed junior brother you. I'll make sure he dies without a burial place. With Gu Yuyang and the other 3 leading the way, the 9 of them flew directly to the canyon where the star crystal lode was located. By the time the 9 of them arrived at the valley, Yixing had already finished setting up the formation and was cultivating beside the star crystal spiritual essence. Furthermore, the 9 rings in his dantian had already been compressed to the point where they were about to condense into a ball. He was close to awakening his star form. Outside the canyon, Blackie was no longer guarding. Yixing was at the bottom of the canyon, meditating and concentrating on breaking through to the star vortex realm. Therefore, it was quiet both inside and outside the canyon. The 9 of them flew above the canyon. Because of the formation, the void below was distorted, so they could not see the situation inside the canyon. The corpses of Zichuanyu, Ishii Kong, and the other 4 were still beside the canyon, looking the same as when they died. When Du Bianqing and the others saw this, they were instantly enraged, especially Du Bianqing, who emitted a terrifying aura. Du Bianqing's eyes were as sharp as knives. He stared at the coiling snake formation that enveloped the canyon and shouted, break the formation. I'll avenge junior brother Yu and junior sister Kong. I'll tear that bastard into pieces. His voice was so loud that it penetrated the formation. Yixing, who was at the bottom of the canyon, heard it clearly. An angry roar suddenly rang out in the quiet environment. It almost disturbed Yixing's state of mind, almost causing him to wake up from the state where he was fully focused on breaking through to the star vortex realm. Fortunately, Yixing's super brain reacted quickly and was calm enough. He calmed down in an instant. At this moment, no matter what happened outside, Yixing paid no attention to Yixing. He was fully focused on breaking through to the star vortex realm. Of the 4 inner disciples that Du Bianqing brought with him, 1 was a 3-star martial sage, 1 was a 2-star martial sage, and 2 were 1-star martial sages. Hearing Du Bianqing's order, the 4 of them immediately got off the green wind eagle. They each took out a spiritual weapon and attacked the coiling snake formation fiercely. They did not have any talent in formations and could not tell the level of the coiling snake formation that Yixing had set up. However, according to their common sense, a half-step martial sage could not set up a powerful formation. Therefore, the 4 martial sages expected that their joint attack should be able to break the formation in an instant. However, reality greatly exceeded the expectations of the 4 martial saints. When their attacks landed on the coiling snake formation did not instantly break. Instead, the void that was enveloped by the formation shook and suddenly twisted violently. More than 10 star power snakes rushed out from it and attacked the 4 martial sages. Every martial saint was attacked by several astral force snakes. Unknowingly, the god of archery has a 6th leader, Midnight Breeze. Thank you very much. Chapter 195. The counterattack of the formation depended on the strength of the attack. The 1-star martial sage had the weakest attack. Therefore, the 2 1-star martial sages were counterattacked by 3-star force snakes each. The 2-star martial sages were stronger than the 1-star martial sages, so they were counterattacked by 5-star force snakes. As for the 3-star martial sages, their attacks were obviously the strongest, so they were counterattacked by 7-star force snakes. Each star force snake was as thick as a bucket and more than 10 feet long. They were lifelike and contained extremely terrifying power. This sudden change shocked the 4 martial sages. They exclaimed in unison, "A grade 2 formation." A grade 2 formation could kill a martial sage. Even the most ordinary grade 2 formation could kill a beginner martial sage. The cultivation of the 4 martial sages ranged from LV1 to LV3 celestial vortex realm. They were all beginner martial sages. Facing the counterattack of a grade 2 formation, they were shocked and even frightened. At this moment, the 4 martial sages operated their celestial essence with all their might and unleashed their strongest strength. They even used the power of astrology. In an instant, illusions of stars appeared in the sky above the 4 of them. They were all ordinary stars. Sword chi and saber radiance crisscrossed, fist shadows and palm prints bombarded. At the same time, the 4 martial sages launched their strongest counterattack against the star power serpent. Bang! 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 The fight between the 4 martial sages and the coiling snake formation ended in an instant. 4 explosions sounded and the 4 martial sages retreated at the same time. The 2-star martial sages and 3-star martial sages kept retreating. The 3-star martial sages retreated 5 steps and the 2-star martial sages retreated more than 10 steps. They both spat out blood and were obviously injured. Obviously, the 3-star martial sages were only slightly injured. As for the 2-star martial sages, their faces were pale and they almost fell to the ground. They relied on their spiritual weapons to support themselves. As for the 2 1-star martial sages, they flew backward and spat out blood in the air. Although they faced the least amount of attacks, their strength was the weakest. They simply could not withstand the counterattack of the coiling snake formation. The 2 of them flew back dozens of meters before falling to the ground. They could no longer get up. They had suffered fatal injuries. In the blink of an eye, the attacks of the 4 martial saints and the counterattack of the coiling snake formation injured the 4 martial saints. 2 of them were even in danger of losing their lives. A grade 2 formation. Du Bianqing, Gu Yuyang, and the other 4 exclaimed in shock. Who would believe that a 16 or 17-year-old half-step martial sage could set up a grade 2 array? Du Bianqing gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. His fists were trembling, which showed how furious he was at the moment. He had come to avenge Sichuanyu, but before he could even see his enemy, another 4 inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect were injured, and 2 of them were fatally wounded. How could he not be furious? He glared fiercely at Gu Yuyang. His meaning was obvious. Was this a formation set up by a young half-step martial sage? If it was a half-step martial sage who had studied formations for decades, it would be reasonable for him to set up a grade 2 formation. But how could a 16 or 17-year-old half-step martial sage have so much time to study formations other than cultivation? Du Bianqing knew how difficult formations were. Without years or even decades of hard work, how could one become a grade 2 formation master and set up a grade 2 formation? Gu Yuyang and the other 3 felt their hearts skip a beat when Du Bianqing stared at them. Gu Yuyang hurriedly explained, Senior Brother Du Bianqing, I saw the person who set up the formation. He is indeed a 16 or 17-year-old half-step martial sage. There is no one else other than him. I'm not lying. Du Bianqing snorted and raised his hand. A purple spear appeared in his hand. This was Du Bianqing's weapon, the purple feather spear. There were strong and weak inferior spiritual weapons, and the purple feather spear was one of the top weapons among them. Du Bianqing held the purple feather spear and jumped down from the back of the green-winged eagle. He glanced at the lightly injured 3-star martial sages and said, Save them. I'll break the formation. As he spoke, Du Bianqing tightened his grip on the spear and his aura exploded. Before he made a move, there was already a terrifying aura that could collapse mountains and tsunamis. It was obvious that Du Bianqing was going to make a strong attack. Purple chi from the east, sun-piercing spear radiance. After 3 breaths, Du Bianqing made a move. His aura had accumulated to the highest level and he performed a killing move of the sun-piercing spear technique, sun-piercing purple radiance. In the blink of an eye, all his aura and power were condensed in the spear. The spear radiance burst out and emitted a purple brilliance. Du Bianqing moved the purple feather spear in his hand and stabbed it at the snake coiling formation. The spear radiance was like a purple rainbow that streaked across the void. It seemed that even the sun in the sky would be pierced by this spear. In an instant, the purple spear radiance pierced the void enveloped by the snake coiling formation. Break! There was a cracking sound. A crack was torn in the void of the formation. Moreover, the crack was spreading in all directions at an extremely fast speed as if it would be completely pierced by the spear. A 3-star martial sage, a 2-star martial sage, and 2 1-star martial sages had joined forces to attack the coiling snake formation, but they had not been able to destroy it at all. Now that Du Bianqing had attacked, he had torn the coiling snake formation apart with 1 spear. This showed that Du Bianqing's strength was so strong that the other 4 martial sages' joint attacks were far inferior to his. Although Du Bianqing was strong, the snake coiling formation was a 2nd-level formation. It could not be broken by his spear. The moment the void of the formation was torn, the snake coiling formation immediately launched a counterattack. In an instant, a total of 18 star power snakes rushed out of the snake coiling formation and attacked Du Bianqing's spear. Bang! In the blink of an eye, one of the star power snakes was destroyed by Du Bianqing's spear radiance. At the same time, Du Bianqing's spear radiance was forcibly broken by the 18 snakes. The collision between the 2 sides resulted in mutual damage. When 6 star power snakes were destroyed by the spear radiance, the rest of the spear radiance was also shattered by the numerous star power snakes and turned into nothingness. In the blink of an eye, there were still 12 star power snakes that came into direct contact with the purple feather spear. The power contained in the purple feather spear was more than twice as strong as the spear radiance's attack. It was almost unstoppable. Wherever the tip of the spear passed, the star power snakes were completely destroyed one by one. The purple feather spear pierced and destroyed the star power snakes in the blink of an eye. When there was only 1 star power snake left, the power of the purple feather spear was finally exhausted. The last star force serpent forced Du Bianqing to take 3 steps back before it was destroyed by Du Bianqing's second burst of celestial essence. If it had been a 2nd-level coiling snake array in the form of an array disc, Du Bianqing's spear would have been enough to destroy it. Unfortunately, it was a 2nd-level coiling snake array in the form of an array base. Even someone as strong as Du Bianqing could not break it in one breath. By the time Du Bian's city unleashed the 2nd wave of celestial essence and destroyed the last snake, the crack in the coiling snake array had already closed up. In the blink of an eye, another 18 snakes made of celestial essence appeared and attacked Du Bian's city. Du Bianqing could not circulate his star power and immediately retreated 100 meters in the blink of an eye, avoiding the attacks of the 18 star power snakes. The first strike had almost completely broken the coiling snake array, but in the end, it had failed. Each base of the coiling snake array was powered by star crystals. Unless the array was broken in an instant, the energy consumed by the array would be instantly replenished. Unless the energy was exhausted, the array could not be broken. However, Du Bianqing, who had suffered the first setback, was not discouraged. Instead, his fighting spirit soared and he once again erupted with terrifying power. Moreover, this time, the scene above Du Bian City changed. A huge illusory star appeared. It was a pure golden planet. It was a pure metal star with the metal attribute. Du Bianqing's astrology was definitely different from that of ordinary people. It was much stronger than most people's astrology. Metal focused on killing. With a metal attribute astrology, any attack would contain powerful lethality, greatly increasing a cultivator's strength. As soon as Du Bianqing used the power of his astrology, his strength skyrocketed. It was in this state that he had defeated a 4-star martial saint once. Whoosh! Du Bianqing stabbed out with the purple feather spear in his hand. It was another purple sun piercing. It was the same person and the same move, but because he used the power of his astrology, the power was completely different. Hiss! This time, there was almost no suspense. The entire coiling snake array was broken with one spear. The 18-star power serpents that had just appeared were instantly annihilated by this spear. The coiling snake array was broken. However, just as Du Bianqing was about to charge into the canyon, the sky suddenly darkened. When will the monthly votes exceed 200? I've been looking forward to it. Brothers, if it's not 200 yet, let's cast a few votes and get 20 votes today. Chapter 196. The sky darkened abruptly and completely. Just a moment ago, it was still bright and sunny. However, in the blink of an eye, the entire world had turned pitch black. It was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. The day had suddenly turned darker than the night. This had never happened in the star continent. Du Bianqing, who was about to rush into the canyon, was shocked. All the hair on his body stood on end and he didn't dare to act rashly. Du Bianqing immediately circulated his celestial essence to protect his body. The purple feather spear also took a defensive stance to protect his body. At this moment, Du Bianqing wasn't the only one who felt the world turn dark. Instead, it was the entire star continent. Everyone within the endless territories felt the world turn dark. They couldn't even see their own fingers if they stretched out their hands. It was as if the entire star continent had suddenly turned from day to night. Whether it was mortals, martial artists, the weak, or the strong, everyone's hearts skipped a beat at this moment. Everyone was shocked. Even the venerables and kings were shocked. They didn't know what had happened. Why had the bright day suddenly turned into pitch-black night? Darkness had shrouded the entire star continent. Yixing, who was in the midst of his astrology awakening, didn't know this. He only sensed a starry sky. Then, the entire starry sky was shrouded by an incomparably huge dark star. In the past, Yixing had only sensed the rough outline of this dark star. However, this time, he clearly sensed the specific shape of this dark star. To be exact, Yixing didn't know if his astrology awakening was a star. He had seen many martial sages use the power of astrology and the astrology awakening was a solid spherical star. However, although his astrology awakening was also in the shape of a star, it wasn't solid. There was a hole in the center. Moreover, the stars that Yixing saw in other people's astrology awakening seemed to be solid. However, his astrology awakening wasn't. The dark star rotated slowly with the hole in the center as its center. Yixing could clearly sense the rotating patterns and was sure that this was a dark vortex. As for the hole in the center of the dark vortex, it was so dark that it was impossible to see or even sense any objects, or colors. Yixing quickly recalled that when he was severely injured by Dong Xianing and fell into a coma, his consciousness had been trapped in this dark vortex. So this really was his astrology. This kind of astrological sign was really strange. It was said that astrological signs were all stars, but his astrological sign was a dark vortex. This reminded him of the name of a celestial body on Earth, black hole. He didn't know if the star continent had the term black hole, but based on his knowledge of martial arts, Yixing really couldn't recognize what kind of astrology this black vortex was. Yixing called it the black hole astrology. Yixing was the only one who could sense the black hole astrology. The other martial artists could not sense it. Even the people in Du Bian City who were very close to Yixing couldn't sense the awakening of Yixing's astrology at all. They couldn't even sense the fluctuation of star power. They could only feel that the world was pitch black. When Wei Qingxuan's astrology awakening, countless martial saints and perfected persons in the Qingyun region felt the fluctuation of star power. However, Yixing's astrology awakening didn't have any fluctuation of star power. The black hole astrology rotated slowly. There wasn't any fluctuation of star power. Instead, the power of the stars in the endless void was absorbed by the black hole astrology and gathered above Yixing, pouring into Yixing's body through the top of his head. This feeling was like being enlightened. Yixing's spirit was refreshed. Then, the endless star power and star power were instinctively absorbed by Yixing. The celestial essence in his body grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yixing cultivated the spirit martial inheritance, the pure Yuan art. The celestial essence cultivated was extremely pure and strong. It required a huge amount of star power to cultivate a trace of pure celestial essence. However, when the black hole astrological manifestation awakened, it absorbed too much star force, as well as a massive amount of star origin qi of higher quality. Naturally, the celestial essence within Yixing's body grew at an extreme speed. Every second, the celestial essence in Yixing's body would change greatly. In just a quarter of an hour, Yixing's internal strength had been completely transformed into celestial essence. Originally, when a half-step martial sage became a one-star martial sage, it would take a period of time to completely transform the internal strength in the body into celestial essence. Only then could one continue to cultivate, improve the quantity and quality of celestial essence, and continue to improve their cultivation. But now, Yixing was only at the stage of astrology awakening. He had completed the steps that only one-star martial sages could complete. Moreover, his cultivation was rapidly improving. Half an hour later, Yixing's celestial essence had filled the meridians of his body. 3/4 of an hour later, Yixing's celestial essence had integrated into his flesh and blood. 40/4 of an hour later, Yixing's celestial essence had entered his bone marrow and reached his skin. In other words, in just half an hour, Yixing's celestial essence had reached every part of his body. This was a level that only one-star martial sages could achieve. This meant that once Yixing's cultivation broke through to the celestial vortex realm, he would be at the peak of celestial vortex realm level 1. He would be a one-star martial sage. From the initial stage of one-star martial sage to the peak of one-star martial sage, even if one had the mandate of martial sage, it would take 1 year or even several years to achieve it. Only a few geniuses could shorten the time to 1 year, but it would still take several months. However, Yixing had not completely broken through to the celestial vortex realm. He was only at the stage of astrology awakening, but he had already achieved it. After half an hour, the black hole vortex in the starry sky had become extremely clear. Except for the black hole in the center of the vortex, which Yixing could not see or feel, he could clearly sense the entire black hole astrology. Yixing guessed that his astrology awakening had succeeded and should be completed soon. The last step of astrology awakening was to absorb the entire astrology awakening into the space between the eyebrows. From then on, the cultivator would be able to use the power of the astrology awakening at will. However, the black hole astrology above Yixing did not fall into the space between his eyebrows. Instead, in the part of the starry sky that was almost occupied by the black hole astrology, another star lit up. Then, a second star, a third star. What's going on? Yixing was shocked. The awakening of the black hole astrology was already beyond his understanding. The current situation was once again beyond his expectations. Could it be another astrology awakening? My astrology awakening is not only the black hole astrology, but also other astrology awakening. But how can a person have two astrology awakening? Yixing could not help but think. The conjecture in his heart almost made him scream out loud. Two astrology awakening. This was too unbelievable. Even Yixing himself felt that this was too absurd. Although his martial arts cultivation was not high and his knowledge was limited, he still knew the common sense. Although the astrology awakening was different, everyone's astrology awakening was unique. This was something that Zishanho had told him before. If he had two astrology awakening, this would completely break the common sense of martial arts. Yixing could explain the black hole astrology awakening by saying that it was an astrology that he did not know of. How could he explain having two astrology awakening? Soon, Yixing confirmed that he had indeed awakened a second astrology awakening. Moreover, his second astrology awakening was a multi-star astrology awakening. In the starry sky, stars awakened one after another, becoming bright and resplendent. They occupied half of the starry sky, competing with the black hole astrology awakening. After a full hour, Yixing's second astrology awakening was finally complete. Countless stars in the starry sky connected to form a complete shape, a bow. This was a huge bow formed by countless stars. It was incomparably huge, competing with the incomparably huge black hole astrology awakening. Each of them occupied half of the starry sky. The arrow on the huge bow was extremely long, extending far out of the bow. The bowstring leaned against the black hole astrology, while the arrow pointed in the other direction. This is the Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening. Yixing felt the bow and arrow astrology awakening in the starry sky. His heart was filled with shock. Regarding the multi-star astrology awakening, there was no record of it in the martial arts manuals that Yixing had read. These were all things that Zishanho had mentioned to him before. Although Zishanho was a martial saint, he was very knowledgeable. Many enlightened masters were not as knowledgeable as him. When he talked to Yixing about the multi-star astrology awakening, he had specifically mentioned the Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening. According to Zishanho, the constellation astrology awakening was the strongest astrology awakening among the multi-star astrology awakening. It was also the strongest astrology awakening. And the Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening was undoubtedly the strongest astrology awakening for archers. The constellation astrology awakening was the strongest astrology awakening, but the two stars that Yixing had awakened just happened to occupy half of the starry sky. They were evenly matched, and no one occupied half more. From this, it could be seen that the black hole astrology awakening was not inferior to the Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening. If it was divided according to the single-star astrology awakening and the multi-star astrology awakening, the black hole astrology awakening should be classified as a single-star astrology awakening. But how could a single-star astrology awakening compete with the strongest astrology awakening? Yixing felt that his martial arts knowledge had been completely disrupted. Even what Zishanho said was not the truth. The Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening and the black hole astrology awakening stood side by side in the starry sky. However, because of the darkness caused by the black hole astrology awakening, no one in the entire star mainland was able to see Yixing's Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening. Even Du Bianqing and the others, who were the closest to Yixing, had never expected that the sudden darkness was actually caused by Yixing's awakening of his astrology. None of the martial artists in the entire star mainland would have thought that the darkness that enveloped the entire star mainland was actually related to someone's awakening. Following the complete awakening of the Sagittarius constellation astrology awakening, the entire starry sky began to fall. It was instinctively absorbed into the space between Yixing's eyebrows. The space between Yixing's eyebrows turned into a starry sky. However, it was occupied by a bow and arrow and a dark vortex, one on the left and one on the right. The two astrology awakening were evenly matched. Both astrology awakening were absorbed into the space between Yixing's eyebrows. Yixing's astrology awakening was complete. The starlight in his dantian began to revolve, turning into a vortex. Because of the black hole astrology, Yixing's vortex was also pitch black. It was a different kind of black hole vortex. I'm home. I've been tired from traveling for 2 days. I'll sleep early tonight and rest. I'll make up for it tomorrow. I'll continue to ask for monthly votes. Although they had guessed that what Si Kongyan didn't dare to say was definitely not something good, they didn't expect it to be so serious. As the supreme ruler of the Star Continent, the Daryuan dynasty had been passed down for 10,000 years, and its foundation was extremely strong. Even if a calamity descended and its foundation was on the verge of collapse, its destruction wasn't something that could be accomplished in a single day. Especially the current utmost king of the Daryuan dynasty, Meng Tai, who had inherited the legacy of his ancestors and was extremely powerful. He swept across the Star Continent and was almost invincible. His lifespan was only 400 years, which was in the prime of his life. The Daryuan dynasty also produced many outstanding people and was extremely powerful. Under the governance of the utmost king, Meng Tai, it was a scene of prosperity and prosperity. There was almost no reason for it to be defeated. Even if it was defeated, it would take hundreds of years. As for its destruction, it should be after the utmost king, Meng Tai, passed away. It would take at least 500 to 600 years. How could the Daryuan dynasty be destroyed in a single day after 10 years? This was unbelievable. A bunch of nonsense. Deluding the crowd with lies. The Daryuan dynasty is like the sun in the sky. How could it be destroyed in a single day after 10 years? Many of the heroes in the hall shouted angrily and criticized Si Kongyan. However, they obviously did not pay attention to Si Kongyan's words. Si Kongyan did not say that the Daryuan dynasty would be destroyed in a single day after 10 years, but within 10 years. Within 10 years, it could be 3 to 5 years, or it could be 7 to 8 years. The longest was 10 years. It was no wonder that although Si Kongyan had deduced the fate of the Daryuan dynasty, he did not dare to say it just now. When he said it, it was indeed shocking and caused him to be reprimanded. Especially the utmost king, Meng Tai, who was furious when he heard it. He was one of the strongest utmost kings in the history of the Daryuan dynasty. He wanted to develop the Daryuan dynasty to an even more powerful stage. How could he believe that the Daryuan dynasty would be destroyed in a single day after 10 years? As the utmost king of the Daryuan dynasty, if he was still alive, how could the Daryuan dynasty be destroyed? On the other hand, if the Daryuan dynasty was destroyed in a single day after 10 years, wouldn't it mean that he, the utmost king, only had 10 years to live? Meng Tai thought that it was impossible. He was almost invincible in the Star Continent. Who could kill him? If Meng Tai was a fatuous ruler, Si Kongyan would probably die an unnatural death after saying what he said. Of course, since Si Kongyan dared to say that, Meng Tai was naturally not a fatuous ruler. Since the utmost king, Meng Tai, did not believe Si Kongyan's words, the anger in his heart dissipated quickly. He said, Imperial Advisor Si Kong, I know that you are proficient in the art of deduction and are loyal to the Daryuan dynasty. However, there are always times when people make mistakes. No wonder you said that the outcome was not clear. It seems that there was indeed a mistake. Next time, don't speak carelessly. The fate of the Daryuan dynasty is at its peak and will only become stronger and stronger. Even if there is a time when it will be destroyed, it will definitely be after I pass away. How could it be defeated by me? Although the utmost king, Meng Tai, was talking about Si Kongyan, he was actually confirming his own confidence. A year ago, Imperial Advisor Si Kong, you deduced that the demon star would wreak havoc and threaten the foundation of the Daryuan dynasty. However, the demon star was eliminated as soon as it was born. Who else can wreak havoc in the dynasty? The Dark Star sect. I doubt they have the ability to do so. Seeing that the utmost king, Meng Tai, and the other heroes did not believe him, Si Kongyan sighed in his heart. He was very confident in his deduction skills. However, it was a pity that no one believed him. He could not say too much. If he said too much, he might really anger the utmost king, Meng Tai, and his life would be in danger. Si Kongyan said, "Your Majesty is right. It was indeed my mistake." The utmost king, Meng Tai, nodded his head. "Get up. Imperial Advisor, you don't have to worry about a mistake. In the future, I will have to trouble you to continue to contribute to the Daryuan dynasty." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Si Kongyan got up. There were two thoughts intertwining in his mind. One was to protect himself and pretend to be deaf and dumb. Even if the fate of the Daryuan dynasty was about to be destroyed, he could only bury this news in his stomach. The other was to continue to talk about it and let the utmost king, Meng Tai, take this matter seriously. This was because the utmost king, Meng Tai, really valued him very much. This made him want to risk his life to serve the Daryuan dynasty. Of course, after thinking about it, the first thought prevailed. His own life was the most important. Clang! At this moment, there was a sudden rush of a bell from outside the hall. The faces of everyone in the hall changed. The bell had a special meaning. If it was not a major event, as if the sky was falling, the bell would not have rung so urgently. When the bell stopped ringing, a person rushed into the hall and knelt down before the utmost king, Meng Tai. "Your Majesty, when the sky was dark, the ancestral mausoleum split open and the dragon vein collapsed. The fate of the Daryuan dynasty, which had accumulated for 10,000 years, dissipated." "What?" The utmost king, Meng Tai, shouted angrily. His face was instantly covered with a layer of murderous intent. All the heroes in the hall changed their expressions. The ancestral mausoleum and the dragon vein were the symbols of the Daryuan dynasty's fate. Fate, in particular, affected the rise and fall of the dynasty. Now that there was a problem, it was an extremely ominous sign. In an instant, everyone's eyes gathered on Si Kongyan. Previously, they thought that Si Kongyan was talking nonsense to mislead the crowd. But now, the facts had proven that Si Kongyan's words were not false. The utmost king, Meng Tai, was livid. But soon, his expression returned to normal. He did not show his emotions on his face as he looked at Si Kongyan. "Imperial Advisor Si Kong, I have wronged you. Tell me, who is the one who is causing trouble and wants to destroy the foundation of our dynasty?" Si Kongyan bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesty, I think that the Fiend Star might not be dead. The one who is causing trouble is the Fiend Star who descended on the Star Continent a year ago." The utmost king, Meng Tai, said coldly, "The Fiend Star is not dead. In the entire Star Continent, all those with the surname Yi who were born in those 3 days have been eliminated. Why is the Fiend Star not dead?" Si Kongyan said, "Your Majesty, the Star Continent is so vast. There are countless families with the surname Yi. There are even many families with the surname Yi. How can we investigate them all? There are bound to be some that slip through the net. Furthermore, I have been thinking for the past year. The fiend star might not have been born in the star continent. Your Majesty, do you still remember what happened 2,000 years ago? The utmost king, Meng Tai, nodded. Are you saying that someone came directly from another world? How should we deal with it? Si Kong Yen said seriously, I have two ideas. Chapter 198. The Supreme King Meng Tai nodded, speak. Si Kong Yen said, the first method is to ignore him. Although Fiend Star can threaten the foundation of the Great Yuan dynasty in the future, as long as there is no enmity with him, he may not necessarily be the enemy of the Great Yuan dynasty. Hearing this, the Supreme King Meng Tai frowned. If he has the strength to destroy the foundation of our dynasty, how can he not replace us? We can't ignore him. We must find Fiend Star. As long as Fiend Star is alive, I won't be at ease. Si Kong Yen had already expected that the Supreme King Meng Tai would say this. Even he himself did not agree with the first method, so he said, according to my prediction, the demon star is lush and full of vigor. Even if he wasn't born in the star continent and came from another world, he should still be a young man who is growing up. As the demon star in this chaotic world, he must grow up very fast. His strength must be far beyond ordinary people. He must be a genius. Si Kong Yen's lips curled up slightly, and he continued, the extraterritorial star continent will open in about 3 years. Your Majesty can use this as an excuse to hold a genius selection competition in the entire star continent. First, it will be held in each domain, then in each continent. The top contestants of each domain will participate. Finally, it will be held by the dynasty. The top contestants of each continent will participate. Every genius selection competition will be held a little longer to give Fiend Star enough space to grow. In this way, Fiend Star will definitely be one of the top contestants in every genius selection competition. Finally, he will come before your Majesty. As long as you know who Fiend Star is, you can kill him before he grows up. There will be no more worries. The Supreme King Meng Tai nodded and said, this is a good idea. However, how will I know which genius is Fiend Star? The number of outstanding geniuses in the entire star continent is not small. If I were to kill all of them, there would definitely be complaints everywhere. Furthermore, the Dark Star sect has always been eyeing my Great Yuan dynasty covetously, so I cannot do something that would cause people to lose their support. Even a year ago, the Great Yuan dynasty had secretly killed the baby with the surname Yi. Now, it was naturally impossible for them to kill all the genius juniors in the entire star land. Every single genius represented the hope of a certain force. Killing 1 or 2 would be fine, but if too many were to be killed, then all the forces in the entire star land would be in a state of panic, and complaints would be raised against the Great Yuan dynasty. At this moment, if the enemies of the Great Yuan dynasty raised their arms and called for help, all the forces of the star land would unite to overthrow the Great Yuan dynasty. As a result, Si Kong Yen only knew that it was related to Fiend Star's bow and arrow. However, he did not know that this bow and arrow was one of Fiend Star's astrology. At the bottom of the canyon in Kuan-Yun mountain range, Yi Xing opened his eyes. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth, and he was in a very good mood. He had finally realized his initial dream when he first came to the star mainland, to become a martial sage. Furthermore, there were still 3 days before he arrived at the star mainland. It was only a year. In other words, his goal of becoming a martial sage within a year had been achieved. After becoming a martial sage, Yi Xing could feel the powerful force in his body. It was more than 10 times stronger than when he was a half-step martial sage. Every part of his body, whether it was his meridians, flesh, bones, or skin, contained a rich amount of pure star essence, which meant that his cultivation had reached the peak of the first-level star vortex realm. Although Yixing's physical body was exactly the same as when he was a half-step martial sage, which was the strength of the complete invincible golden body, now that his skin and flesh contained pure star essence, the defensive power of his physical body was much stronger than when he was a half-step martial sage. Compared to the integration of star essence into his flesh and blood, any top-grade body refining cultivation technique was not worth mentioning at all. Yixing scanned his body with the super brain and suddenly found something in his mind. It was a ball of crimson flames, but there were 2 clusters of flames. He had a feeling that his body seemed to be related to this red flame, but he did not know what kind of flame it was. At the same time, Yixing was surprised. Why had he not noticed this red flame before, but now it had been scanned by the super brain? Was it because he had become a martial sage that the super brain had become stronger, or was it because he had become a martial sage that the flame had appeared in his mind? Yixing could not figure it out for the time being. Thief, how dare you kill? As the world returned to normal, Du Bianqing recovered from his shock and immediately rushed to the edge of the canyon and shouted angrily. However, before he could finish his sentence, he saw the star crystal lode at the bottom of the canyon and the star crystal spiritual milk in front of Yixing. In an instant, Du Bianqing's scolding of Yixing was retracted and his tone turned into a cry of surprise. Star crystal lode. Star crystal spiritual milk. Following the exclamation from Du Bian's city, the expressions of the other 8 people also brightened when they heard this. Star crystal lode. Star crystal spiritual milk. These were treasures that could only be found by chance. Star crystal lode was of great use to the sect, and star crystal spiritual milk was of great help to one's cultivation. Gu Yuyang and the other 4 disciples rushed to the edge of the canyon. Their eyes lit up when they saw the star crystal lode at the bottom of the canyon. The other 4 inner disciples of the East supporting sect also came to the edge of the canyon, supporting each other. Although the 2 one-star martial sages had suffered fatal injuries, they were treated in time and saved their lives. After 2 hours, their injuries had recovered a lot. Seeing the star crystal lode and star crystal spiritual milk at the bottom of the canyon, the other 8 people exclaimed. Compared to the value of the lode and star crystal spiritual milk, avenging Zichuanyu was just a small matter. Seeing that Yixing had become a 1-star martial sage, Gu Yuyang immediately knew that Yixing had broken through to the star crystal spiritual milk at the bottom of the canyon. Looking at the 5 inner disciples of the Dongfu sect, Gu Yuyang knew that the 4 of them could not compete with the 4 martial sages for the star crystal spiritual milk. As for the star crystal lode, if they sent the news back to the sect as soon as possible, the Dongfu sect might be able to get a share of it and earn a lot of contribution points. Gu Yuyang immediately gestured to the other 4 disciples of the Dongfu sect, indicating that they should leave immediately. Whoosh! At this moment, a purple spear light suddenly streaked across the void and stabbed toward Gu Yuyang and the other 3. Chapter 199. The purple spear radiance blossomed like fireworks, incomparably beautiful. However, beauty and danger were often proportional. Gu Yuyang and the other 3 immediately felt a fatal danger. Poof! 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 3 flowers of blood blossomed as the purple spear radiance pierced through the throats of the 3 ranked 9 martial artists in the blink of an eye. Du Bianqing had killed martial artists below the martial sage realm with ease. His opponents had no chance to retaliate. As for the half-step martial sage Gu Yuyang, he also had no chance to retaliate. However, Du Bianqing had thrown out an array disc, giving him a chance to catch his breath. As a direct descendant of the Gu clan, Gu Yuyang's status was obviously not ordinary. He was only a half-step martial sage, but the array disc he had thrown out was a grade 2 copper wall array. The second-level formation, the bronze wall formation, could completely defend against the attack of a beginner martial sage. Unfortunately, Gu Yuyang only threw out a formation plate instead of the bronze wall formation in the form of a formation plate. Therefore, the bronze wall formed by the formation was still pierced through by Du Bianqing's spear. Poof! Gu Yuyang was sent flying by the spear, blood splattering from his chest. Most of the spear's power had been blocked by the copper wall array. Although Gu Yuyang was heavily injured, he had not been killed instantly. The Blood Ghost sect and the Dong Fu sect are allied forces. Why did you kill us? Gu Yuyang, who had fallen far away, covered the bleeding wound on his chest and shouted angrily at Du Bianqing. You wanted to go back and report to the Blood Ghost sect so that they could share the benefits of this star crystal load. Don't you deserve to die? Du Bianqing was in a good mood. With a happy smile on his face, he stabbed his spear again, nailing Gu Yuyang to the ground. This star crystal load belongs to the Dong Fu sect. Du Bianqing stared at Gu Yuyang's corpse with a smile, but his voice was cold. At this moment, Yi Xing had already arrived at the other side of the canyon. He faced off against the 5 martial sages from Du Bian City and looked at them coldly. Du Bianqing wanted to silence him and the 4 Blood Spectre sect disciples so that the East Fu sect could obtain the star crystal load alone. Yi Xing also wanted the Falling Star sect to obtain the star crystal load alone. Therefore, he wanted to capture the 5 martial saints in one fell swoop to prevent them from leaking the news. 2 1-star martial saints, 1 2-star martial saint, and 2 3-star martial saints. Yi Xing sized up Du Bianqing and the other martial sages and felt great pressure. These 5 people were much stronger than Zichuanyu's group. This was especially true for Du Bianqing, who was wielding the purple plume spear. His strength was not weaker than a 4-star martial sage. Even the coiling snake formation had been broken by his spear. He was very difficult to deal with. Now, Yi Xing had no outside help and could only rely on himself. The only thing he could rely on was the dual astrology he had awakened when he broke through to the celestial vortex realm. However, it was hard to judge the strength of his astral energy without going through an actual battle. While observing the 5 martial sages from Du Bian City, Yi Xing naturally scanned them with his super brain. A small discovery instantly lifted his spirits. Yi Xing also saw a ball of flame in the minds of the 5 martial saints. However, the color of the flames in their minds was different from his. They were all orange. Moreover, the size of their flames were different. The 2 1-star martial saints had 2 and 3 clusters of flames, the 2 2-star martial saints had 4 clusters of flames, and the 2 3-star martial saints had 6 and 9 clusters of flames, respectively. Red and orange. Yi Xing realized that the color of the heavens was very similar to the color of the blood fate stone. Moreover, Yi Xing was a 2-star heaven's will, which was the most common red life. The flames in his mind were red and there were 2 flames. Didn't this mean that he was a 2-star red life? As for the 5 martial saints, the 2 1-star martial saints had 2 and 3 flames respectively. This represented a 2-star orange life and a 3-star orange life. The 2-star martial saints had 4 flames, which represented a 4-star orange life. The 2 3-star martial saints had 6 and 9 flames respectively, which represented a 6-star orange life and a 9-star orange life. The more Yi Xing thought about it, the more he felt that his judgment was reliable. The flames in his mind should be the heaven's will, or the manifestation of the heaven's will. Others couldn't directly see the level of the heaven's will. Before Yi Xing became a martial saint, he couldn't see it either. It could be seen that after Yi Xing became a martial saint, the super brain had become one with his brain and had evolved. After the evolution, the super brain could scan the level of the heaven's will. This was an unexpected surprise. If others wanted to know the level of the heaven's will, they had to use the blood fate stone to test it. However, Yi Xing could directly scan it with his super brain. No matter if it was his or someone else's will, he could see it with a glance. After killing Gu Yuyang and the other three, Du Bianqing turned his fierce gaze to Yixing. His gaze was as sharp as a knife. After staring at Yixing for a few breaths, Du Bianqing said in a cold voice, "So it was you who killed junior brother Yu and the others." Du Bianqing obviously recognized Yixing. The other four martial saints also recognized him. They were all from sects, so they naturally recognized Yixing, who was on the East Fujian sect's blacklist. Yixing nodded. "It was me." Du Bianqing stared at Yixing, as if he wanted to see Yixing's fear. Unfortunately, he failed. Yixing was still calm. "You relied on the star crystal spiritual essence to break through to the star vortex realm. Your cultivation isn't very high, but you have guts." Du Bianqing's voice was cold. Yixing's calm reaction in front of him made him very unhappy. Yixing nodded again. "That's right. Now I'm thinking about how to kill you." Ha ha ha. Du Bianqing was so angry that he laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke. "Without the formation, you are nothing but an ant. Senior Brother Qing, let me capture this little thief alive." Senior Brother Qing can torture him slowly to avenge Junior Brother Yu. Another three-star martial saint said loudly. He had been injured by Yixing's coiling snake formation, so he hated Yixing to the core. Without the formation, Du Bianqing regarded Yixing as an ant. Naturally, he was too lazy to do it himself. The other three-star martial saint, Zichuanjian, was the brother of Zichuanyu. It was reasonable for him to capture Yixing to avenge Zichuanyu. Du Bianqing nodded to Zichuanjian. "Junior Brother Jian, don't worry about my opinion. Kill him however you want." "Okay." Zichuanjian's eyes were filled with excitement. As he spoke, Zichuanjian raised his hand. A long and narrow spiritual weapon appeared in his hand. He walked step by step toward Yixing. Zichuanjian stared at Yixing with murderous eyes and said word by word, "Boy, I will first cut off your arms, then your legs, then your head. You will die without a complete corpse." Yixing raised his hand. The spiritual inscription bow and the green sandalwood arrow appeared in his hands. He instantly knocked an arrow on the bow and said, "Your mind is too twisted. The fastest way to kill someone is to kill them with one shot. I only need one arrow to kill you. You, a mere one-star martial saint, want to hurt me with a bow and arrow?" Zichuanjian's voice was filled with disdain. He also did not take Yixing seriously. Yixing did not say anything else. He activated the stacking wave arrow technique to the limit. The stacking wave arrow technique had reached 18 layers. The higher the layers, the harder it was to stack each layer. 18 layers was already the limit of the stacking wave arrow technique. In an instant, the green sandalwood arrow had already left the bow and shot toward Zichuanjian. Whoosh! The arrow broke through the air and made a loud sound. Yixing was not far away from Zichuanjian. The arrow left the bow and was already in front of Zichuanjian. "Break!" Zichuanjian shouted. His speed suddenly increased and he slashed down with his saber, bringing out a dazzling white saber light. Clang! With a loud sound, the green sandalwood arrow was sent flying. Chapter 200. When Zichuanjian rushed over, Yixing shot another arrow. However, Zichuanjian, who had used the power of the astrology, was much more powerful and easily split the arrow apart. In the blink of an eye, the spiritual weapon brought out a dazzling blade radiance and chopped down on Yixing's head. If the saber hit its target, it might not be able to split Yixing's body in half, but it would at least split his head in half. Since Zichuanjian had used the power of the astrology, Yixing did not plan to block him with the arrow. The super brain had already scanned Zichuanjian's every move. Yixing had already predicted Zichuanjian's attack trajectory. Therefore, when the arrow left the bow, Yixing's body flashed and he used the cloud goose flight to quickly dodge to the side. The cloud goose flight was a top-grade lightness skill. Yixing's cloud goose flight had been cultivated to the transformation realm. Moreover, after he became a martial sage, he used his celestial essence and his speed was much faster than when he was a half-step martial sage. Although Zi Chuanjian's blade radiance was as fast as lightning, Yixing had already predicted it and dodged quickly. He successfully dodged the blade radiance. Whether it was Zi Chuanjian or the people in Dubian City who were not far away, they were all shocked. Obviously, they did not expect that Yixing could dodge Zi Chuanjian's lightness skill with just a top-grade lightness skill. What Zi Chuanjian had used was a spiritual martial lightness skill. Especially Zi Chuanjian's blade radiance skill. Even a martial sage who had cultivated a spiritual martial lightness skill would find it difficult to dodge. However, Yixing had used a top-grade lightness skill to dodge the attack. It was really shocking. Die! Zi Chuanjian's blade radiance skill did not hit Su Mo and he became angry. He shouted loudly and the blade radiance swept out like a moon. Low-grade spiritual martial skill, falling moon blade technique. Move, half-moon dash. It was very difficult to cultivate a spiritual martial skill. Zi Chuanjian's falling moon blade technique had reached the small success stage and it was very fast. The saber swept towards Yixing as he dodged. A martial artist's attack speed far exceeded his movement speed. Hence, even if Yixing's speed was faster than a normal person's, it was still difficult for him to continuously dodge Zi Chuanjian's attacks. Even if Yixing was able to predict the enemy's movements, Zi Chuanjian's moves were too fast. By the time Yixing scanned the trajectory of Zi Chuanjian's attack, the other spirit weapon had already reached his waist. Unless Yixing was able to completely dodge out of the attack range of the spirit weapon blade in an instant, otherwise, if he dodged in a small area, the opponent would be able to immediately change the trajectory of the attack and strike Yixing. After all, the strength of a 3-star martial sage was extraordinary. This saber strike had forced Yixing into a desperate situation. Black hole astrology. At this moment, Yixing immediately used the power of astrology. In an instant, the scene above his head changed and turned into a pitch-black whirlpool. In an instant, Zi Chuanjian's vision suddenly turned black. The whole world turned into darkness and he could not even see his fingers. The only thing he could see was a huge black whirlpool above him, which made his heart palpitate. This time, it was not the whole star continent that was shrouded in darkness. Only Zi Chuanjian felt the boundless darkness. Since he could not even see his fingers, how could Zi Chuanjian see Yixing? Naturally, he had become blind. What was more terrifying was that the black whirlpool in the sky seemed to have a strong devouring power. It made Zi Chuanjian feel that the star essence in his body was being forcibly sucked away and was about to leave his body. The sudden change made Zi Chuanjian's face turn pale. His heart was instantly filled with fear. The momentum of the saber strike suddenly weakened rapidly and its speed also stopped. When Yixing used the black hole astrology, he felt a little strange. He could feel every inch of space in all directions clearly. It was as if the darkness was his sense of touch. As long as it was in the darkness, there was nothing that he did not know. Seeing his opponent's momentum weaken and his speed stop, Yixing knew that his opponent had fallen into the darkness. He immediately leaned back. His legs were planted on the ground as if they were rooted. His body fell down and he immediately avoided the sweeping saber strike. Although it was said that he had avoided it, it was not completely avoided because Yixing's body was too close to the blade. As long as Zi Chuanjian could see it, he would have pressed the blade down slightly and it would still hit Yixing. Therefore, for a martial sage, such a dodge was almost useless. In the distance, Du Bianqing and the others did not feel the darkness of the black hole astrology. They only saw a black star suddenly appear above Yixing. It was blurry and they could only vaguely see the outline of it. They did not know what star it was. From their point of view, Yixing's dodging would only lead to his death. Zichuanjian pressed the blade down slightly and was about to slice off Yixing's stomach. However, to Du Bianqing and the other's surprise, Zichuanjian did not change the trajectory of the saber strike. The blade almost touched Yixing's clothes and cut above Yixing's stomach. The sharp saber qi even cut several cracks on Yixing's clothes on his stomach. However, Yixing's body was protected by the pure essence of the star essence. Moreover, his physical body had already cultivated the invincible golden body to the perfection realm. It was very tough. Even after being swept by the saber qi, he was not injured at all. Was Zichuanjian blind? Du Bianqing and the others were puzzled. However, what puzzled Du Bianqing and the others even more was yet to come. When the spirit weapon saber swept across Yixing's stomach, Yixing's body bounced back like a spring and his upper body instantly stood up. At the same time, a spiritual weapon short saber appeared in Yixing's hand. Whoosh! The spiritual weapon short saber instantly burst out a bright saber light and cut across the void. At the same time, Yixing took a step forward. His body suddenly rushed forward and the spiritual weapon short saber in his hand swept across Zichuanjian's neck. After the saber sweep, Zichuanjian suddenly retreated as if he could not see Yixing. However, when he retreated, Yixing advanced and did not pull away at all. The spiritual weapon short saber in Yixing's hand swept across Zichuanjian's throat in an instant. Not good. Du Bianqing and the others were shocked. Zichuanjian looked like he was really blind. He only knew how to retreat but did not know how to move his neck to avoid Yixing's attack. Yixing's attack on Zichuanjian's neck with the spiritual weapon short saber had no moves to speak of. It was just an ordinary slash. Logically speaking, Zichuanjian should not have been hit. However, the truth was that Zichuanjian's neck was instantly slashed with a deep wound. Blood spurted out and splattered out. Zichuanjian instantly let out a shrill scream. He covered his neck with one hand and waved the spiritual weapon saber in front of him in a flurry. However, Yixing had already circled around his body and stood behind him. Zichuanjian's attack was even aimed in the wrong direction. Naturally, it did not touch Yixing. The throat was a vital part of the human body. With a deep wound, Zichuanjian merely waved the spiritual weapon saber 5 or 6 times before his body fell backward and convulsed. He was already on the verge of death. Junior apprentice brother Jian. After Zichuanjian's throat was cut, while he was still waving the spiritual weapon saber in his hand, Du Bianqing roared and stabbed the purple quill spear in his hand towards Yixing. In an instant, a purple rainbow cut through the void and appeared in front of Yixing fast. The speed of this spear was so fast that Yixing could not even react in time. If Yixing had not paid attention to Du Bianqing, this spear would have already pierced his chest and killed him in one blow. However, even though Yixing had already expected this spear when Du Bianqing circulated his celestial essence and had already started to dodge, he still could not completely avoid this spear. Seeing that the purple quill spear was about to pierce his right chest, Yixing pushed the pure essence celestial essence in his body to the limit. The spiritual weapon short saber in his hand shone brightly and slammed against the spearhead, trying to push the spear away. Clang! With a loud bang, the spiritual weapon short saber in Yixing's hand flew out in an instant and burst into the distance. The purple quill spear in Du Bianqing's hand only slightly deviated from its trajectory and brushed past Yixing's shoulder, leaving behind a bright red wound that bled profusely in an instant. That spear strike was simply too terrifying. It had almost killed Yixing with that strike. If this spear had pierced through his chest, Yixing would never have been able to escape from Du Bianqing's killing move. Even if Du Bianqing had merged into the darkness of the black hole astrology at this moment, he could no longer see Yixing's figure, only a huge dark vortex in the sky. What the hell is this? Could it be that Yixing's astrology has the effect of making people fall into darkness, making people unable to see anything? Du Bianqing was shocked and his expression changed drastically. At this moment, he finally understood why Zichuanjian looked like he was blind. In this situation, the surroundings were so dark that he couldn't even see his own fingers. He was no different from a blind person. Du Bianqing's heart suddenly trembled. He immediately connected the current darkness with the darkness that he had felt earlier. He couldn't believe it. He immediately reacted. Guyuyang said that he was a half-step martial sage, but he is now a one-star martial sage and has an astrology that can make people blend into the dark world. Then, when the bright sun turned into darkness, could it be that his astrology had awakened? Although this was ridiculous, how could a person's astrology awaken cause the world to turn dark? Du Bianqing was very sure of his guess now that he was in the dark world. A sense of fear rose in Du Bianqing's heart at the thought that he couldn't see Yixing, but Yixing could see him clearly. Although Du Bianqing felt that his spear had pierced Yixing, he couldn't see Yixing's figure and didn't dare to attack blindly. He immediately retracted his spear and took a defensive stance. He circulated his celestial essence to his ears and listened to the sounds around him to determine Yixing's location. Du Bianqing's attack speed was extremely fast. After Yixing was stabbed by Du Bianqing's spear, Zichuanjian fell to the ground. At this moment, Yixing retreated to the side. He didn't counterattack Du Bianqing at all. Instead, he looked shocked. He felt a sudden surge of power coming from the black hole astrology and fusing into his mind. Yixing immediately scanned his mind with his super brain and a shocking scene appeared. Chapter 201. In Yixing's mind. The red flame that symbolized destiny suddenly changed. It went from 2 flames to 3 flames. In the time it took for Yixing to snap his fingers in shock, the number of flames increased from 3 to 4. This meant that Yixing's destiny had increased from a 2-star red life to a 3-star red life, and then to a 4-star red life. What was destiny? Destiny was preordained by the heavens. Since it was destined, how could it be changed? Regardless of whether it was the martial arts manuals Yixing had read or the knowledge he had learned, destiny was something that could not be changed. However, at this moment, his martial arts knowledge was shattered once again. Yixing was completely shocked. In the blink of an eye, another flame appeared, and now there were 5 flames. Yixing's destiny was still increasing. The cause of this was some kind of power transmitted from the black hole astrology. According to the law of conservation of energy, Yixing immediately realized that the power transmitted from the black hole astrology had to have a source. It couldn't have been created out of thin air. Yixing's gaze immediately turned to Zichuanjian's corpse. The super brain scanned Zichuanjian's head. Just as Yixing had expected, the orange flame that symbolized destiny in Zichuanjian's mind was gradually shrinking. The black hole astrology had actually devoured the destiny in Zichuanjian's mind and absorbed it into its own, causing its own destiny to increase. Devouring other people's destinies. The black hole astrology actually has such a heaven-defying effect. Yixing thought to himself in shock. Yixing had discovered 3 effects of the black hole astrology so far. The first was to create a world of darkness where the opponent would be blind. The second was to merge with the darkness and turn it into one's sense of touch, allowing one to sense everything in the darkness. The third was to devour other people's destinies to increase one's own destiny. These 3 effects didn't increase Yixing's attack power, but each of them was heaven-defying. In Yixing's opinion, the black hole astrology's effect was more valuable than any other astrology that could increase attack power. Although the black hole astrology didn't directly increase his attack power, it was enough for Yixing to defeat enemies who were stronger than him. Moreover, it could also increase his destiny. Such an ability was simply overpowered. Yixing watched as his heavens will continue to rise. He was overjoyed and excited. Destiny had always been his shortcoming. Fortunately, he had the support of his powerful astrology, which prevented him from reaching a bottleneck in the astral tempering realm. However, the star-quenching realm was the first realm of cultivation. It was the stage of laying the foundation and the beginning of martial arts. Yixing could cultivate in the star-quenching realm unimpeded by astrology, but what about the star vortex realm and the star gang realm? What about the astral reaching realm and star sea realm? If his destiny was too low, there would be a day when Yixing would reach a bottleneck on the path of martial arts. But now, the black hole astrology could devour destiny, so this worry was completely gone. Because the black hole astral projection was constantly devouring Zichuanjian's destiny, the red fireball in Yixing's mind was constantly expanding. More and more flames were added to the fireball. It didn't take long for Yixing's heaven's will to reach the 9 stars' crimson fate. His crimson ball of fire burned with 9 flames. This was the limit of immortal fate. As more and more destiny was devoured by the black hole astrology, the red ball of fire in Yixing's mind underwent a qualitative change. The 9 flames gathered together and continued to compress. Soon, it became a single flame, which was 1/9 of its original size. Although the ball of fire had shrunk, its color had changed from red to orange. Yixing's destiny had improved by leaps and bounds, evolving from a red life to an orange life. In other words, he had evolved from an ordinary mortal life to a martial saint destiny. After reaching the martial saint destiny, the orange ball of fire continued to grow bigger and bigger. Yixing's destiny continued to increase. 2-star orange life. 3-star orange life. Eventually, 6 flames burned on the orange ball of fire, which meant that Yixing's destiny was a 6-star orange life. At this point, the orange flame in Zichuanjian's mind had completely disappeared, leaving not a trace behind. Under the devouring of Yixing's black hole astrology, all of Zichuanjian's destiny had been transferred to Yixing's destiny, causing Yixing's destiny to reach the 6-star martial saint destiny. A 2-star destiny had become a 6-star martial saint destiny. Who would believe such a thing if it were to spread out? No one would dare to imagine such a thing. If Yixing hadn't experienced it himself, he wouldn't have believed that his destiny could still increase. Moreover, it had increased by so much in such a short period of time. A 6-star orange life was already the peak of a mid-level martial saint's destiny. Whether it was in the Falling Star sect or the Dongfu sect, a 6-star orange life was considered to be above average. Yixing's gaze shifted to Du Bianqing and the corner of his mouth curled up. Du Bianqing had a 9-star orange life. If he absorbed Du Bianqing's destiny, then his destiny would also reach the 9-star orange life. A 9-star orange life was already a top talent in the Falling Star sect. If an enlightened being heaven's destiny didn't appear, then a 9-star orange life would be a top talent. As for enlightened being heaven's destiny, it would be hard for a single one to appear in the Falling Star sect in several decades. Most of the time, a 9-star orange life would be the #1 genius. Du Bianqing clearly didn't know that Yixing's astrology had the ability to devour heaven's wills. He had already considered Du Bianqing as his prey. Because Yixing didn't move, Du Bianqing couldn't hear Yixing's location. All he could feel was silence. The silence in this world of darkness was extremely uncomfortable. Du Bianqing tried his best to control his emotions, but he couldn't help but feel anxious. Yixing, if you have the guts, then fight me with real swords and spears. What kind of man are you to be hiding? Du Bianqing finally lost his patience after waiting for a while and seeing no movement from Yixing. Not far away, the other 3 inner disciples exchanged glances. They weren't affected by the black hole astrology and could clearly see Yixing and Du Bianqing. Yixing clearly wasn't hiding and was just 100 meters to the left of Du Bianqing. Why did Du Bianqing say that Yixing was hiding? It was really puzzling. Recalling that Zichuanjian seemed to have been blinded in his battle with Yixing, the three of them immediately reacted. Could it be that Du Bianqing had also been blinded? As long as he fought with Yixing, he would be blinded. What kind of situation was this? What kind of martial art could have such an effect? If it really had such an effect, could it still be called a martial art? It was simply a demonic art. Senior Apprentice Brother Qing. Yixing is on your left, about 270 steps away. The two-star martial sage of the three shouted. The other two one-star martial sages were severely injured. Although the two-star martial sage's injuries were not light, they were not life-threatening. He still had the strength to shout. About 270 steps to your left. Du Bianqing didn't move at all. In this pitch-black world of darkness, there was no sense of direction or distance. There was a 90-degree range between the front and the left. Since he couldn't see the target, Du Bianqing couldn't determine the specific direction of Yixing. Moreover, even if he knew the specific direction, Du Bianqing couldn't pinpoint the exact distance of 270 steps. If he took 270 steps step by step, it would be too late. Du Bianqing still held the purple feather spear in his hand, maintaining a defensive posture and vigilance. At this moment, it should be better to retreat from this dark space, but Du Bianqing didn't dare to act rashly. He didn't know how far he had to retreat before he could leave this dark space. Secondly, Yixing's arrow could attack at any time. He had to defend with all his strength. If he relaxed his mind, he might face Yixing's arrow attack. In the distance, Yixing took out the spiritual pattern bow and the blue sandalwood arrow. He put the arrow on the bow and pointed it at Du Bianqing. Senior Brother Qing, be careful. Yixing is pointing his arrow at you. The two-star martial saint hurriedly shouted. Zichuanjian and Du Bianqing were both three-star martial saints, especially Du Bianqing, whose strength was no less than a four-star martial saint. Something happened when he went to kill Yixing. Although the two-star martial saint shouted happily, he didn't dare to rush up to deal with Yixing. Moreover, he was seriously injured now. If he rushed up, he would definitely die. He couldn't block Yixing's arrow at all. Du Bianqing received the warning and became more vigilant. He ran his star essence to his ears and listened to every movement in all directions. At the same time, he shouted, "What are you waiting for? Call for help." Hearing this, the two-star martial saints and the two one-star martial saints fired signal flares into the sky. 3 light beams shot up into the sky and exploded thousands of meters high in the sky, turning into 3 sunflowers. Yixing didn't change his target to shoot the other 3 martial saints. Yixing still didn't understand the dark world effect of the black hole astrology. He didn't know if others would attack him and enter the dark world, or if he attacked others, others would enter the dark world. If he attacked the other 3 martial saints and caused Du Bianqing to leave the dark world, it would be terrible. He would be in fatal danger. Yixing didn't rush to shoot the arrow. His shoulder was still bleeding. Every time he drew the bow, the injury on his shoulder would be strained. Therefore, Yixing wanted to reduce the number of times he drew the bow as much as possible. It would be best to kill Du Bianqing with 1 arrow. In that case, Yixing would raise the power of this arrow to the highest level before shooting it. Sagittarius astrology. Yixing's heart skipped a beat. In an instant, the bow and arrow rushed out from the space between his eyebrows and turned into a huge bow and arrow above Yixing. The black hole astrology couldn't increase Yixing's attack power, but the Sagittarius astrology could increase the attack power of Yixing's arrow. In the dark world, Du Bianqing could only see the dark vortex above Yixing. Nothing else could be seen, not even the huge bow above Yixing. However, the other 3 martial saints weren't shrouded in the dark world and could see everything clearly. Above Yixing, there was not only a huge blurry dark star, but also a huge bow and arrow. When the bow and arrow appeared, Yixing's aura suddenly increased by several times, especially the bow and arrow in Yixing's hand. It revealed a terrifying aura. How is this possible? Two kinds of astrology. A bow and arrow. What kind of astrology is this? The three martial saints' expressions changed and they exclaimed at the same time. Chapter 202. Whoosh! The arrow containing the power of 18 stacked forces and Sagittarius constellation shot out in an instant. The void was torn apart at this moment. Du Bianqing's expression changed. He immediately felt a terrifying murderous intent surging toward him, trying to drag him into the abyss of death. The arrow pierced through the air faster than the sound. It was impossible for Du Bianqing to determine the arrow's location through the sound. At this moment, the only thing Du Bianqing could rely on was his intuition. The stronger a martial artist was, the more sensitive their intuition was. Du Bianqing could roughly determine the direction of the arrow from the murderous intent he felt. The purple feather spear in his hand instantly shone brightly. Spear lifting mountains. In an instant, the purple feather spear trembled. This was a defensive move that could deflect even the attack of a 4-star martial saint. Du Bian City's senses were indeed very sensitive. His spear actually managed to hit the arrow that was flying towards him. Unfortunately, Du Bianqing couldn't accurately determine the arrow's attack trajectory. Although he deflected the arrow, it only grazed the tail of the arrow. The arrow wasn't deflected by the spear. Instead, the tail of the arrow moved up and the arrowhead suddenly moved down. The arrow should have been aimed at Du Bianqing's heart, but it moved down a few inches and hit Du Bianqing's stomach. Du Bianqing used the power of Sagittarius constellation. His star power was extremely vigorous. Celestial essence covered his body and laid down layers of defense. However, Yixing's arrow was too powerful. Not only did it contain the power of 18 stacked forces, but it also contained the power of Sagittarius constellation. Especially the power of Sagittarius constellation, which made the arrow contain a terrifying murderous intent and lethality. Rip! Du Bianqing's celestial essence defense was instantly penetrated by the arrow. The arrow shot into his stomach more than a foot deep. Du Bianqing screamed. He covered his stomach with his hand and retreated a few steps before stabilizing his body. However, the power contained in the arrow didn't just cut his flesh. It also caused great destruction in a large area, causing serious damage to Du Bianqing. Senior Brother Qing. The expressions of the other three martial sages changed drastically. Even Du Bian City had been seriously injured by Yixing. This made them reveal a look of horror in their eyes as they exclaimed at the same time. Yixing pulled open the spirit pattern bow once, and the wound on his shoulder opened up even more, causing the blood to flow even faster. However, he still immediately took out a second blue sandalwood arrow and quickly shot it out. Whoosh! The arrow pierced through the air. This time, Du Bianqing was heavily injured and was unable to block the arrow. The arrow pierced through his throat. Blood immediately spurted out from Du Bianqing's throat. His eyes were filled with horror and disbelief. He fell backward and died instantly. As the number 1 inner disciple of the Dong Fu sect and the number 2 genius of the Dong Fu sect, Du Bianqing had a glorious reputation in the Dong Fu sect. He had never imagined that he would die at the hands of a martial saint who had just broken through to the star vortex realm. Even when he died, he still couldn't believe this fact. The expressions of the other three martial sages completely turned into horror. Even Du Bian City had been killed by Yixing. How could they not be scared out of their wits? Even though Yixing's shoulder was also bleeding, and it was obvious that his injury was not light, the three martial sages regarded Yixing as a venomous snake and ferocious tiger. They were full of fear. Whoosh! The two-star martial saint immediately turned and ran, leaving the other two severely injured one-star martial saints behind. As for the two one-star martial saints, their injuries were too severe. Although they had been treated for 2 hours and their lives had been saved, it was still difficult for them to move. Seeing that the two-star martial saints had abandoned them, their faces turned ashen. They supported each other and slowly retreated. Although he didn't know if the signal flare released by the three martial saints would attract more experts of the Dong Fu sect, Yixing couldn't let them leave alive. Enduring the pain in his shoulder, Yixing instantly took out 3 blue sandalwood arrows, knocked them on the bow, and released the 3 arrows together. Whoosh! 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 Whether it was the two-star martial saints or the two one-star martial saints, not only were they seriously injured, but they were also fleeing at the moment. How could they avoid the arrows shot by Yixing when he used the Sagittarius constellation? The 3 arrows accurately shot into the backs of the 3 martial saints, piercing through their hearts from the back. All of them died instantly. Du Bian City and the other martial saints, like Zichuanyu and the other 2, were all killed by Yixing. So far, 10 inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect had been killed by Yixing. Du Bian City was the number 1 inner disciple of the Dong Fu sect, and Yixing was only a half-step martial saint and was only the number 1 outer disciple of the Falling Star sect. Before and after becoming a martial saint, he had killed 5 inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect. Even Du Bian City, who had once defeated a 4-star martial saint, was killed by Yixing. No one would believe such a record. It was too shocking and beyond common sense. After killing the 3 inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect, Yixing heaved a sigh of relief and put away the spiritual inscription bow in his storage ring. At this moment, the fire of destiny in Yixing's mind began to grow again, from 6 to 7 flames, and it was still growing. In the end, the flames grew to 9. 9 orange flames represented a 9-star orange fate. This was the fate of a peak martial saint, 1 star higher than Zi Shanqiu's 8-star orange fate. Yixing scanned the minds of Du Bian City and the other inner disciples and found that the fire of destiny in their minds had indeed disappeared. All of it had been devoured by the black hole constellation and turned into his own fate. However, the level of Yixing's fate didn't depend on the number of fates devoured by the black hole constellation, but on the highest number of fates devoured. The highest number of fates devoured by the black hole constellation was Du Bian City's 9-star orange fate. Therefore, Yixing's fate was also a 9-star orange fate. In terms of fate, Yixing would be a first-rate genius when he returned to the Falling Star sect. After putting the black hole constellation back into his forehead space, Yixing immediately consumed a top-grade medicinal herb with healing properties. He also squeezed another top-grade medicinal herb into juice and dripped it on the wound on his shoulder. After doing all this, Yixing moved the corpses of the Dong Fu sect's inner disciples to the valley and collected their storage rings and spiritual weapons. These were all Yixing's spoils of war. Of course, among the 5 outer disciples of the Blood Ghost sect, Guiyang also had a storage ring, so Yixing naturally collected it as well. Among the spiritual weapons, Yixing's favorite was the purple feather spear. He loved it so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. This lower-grade spiritual weapon was clearly stronger than any other lower-grade spiritual weapon. With the purple feather spear in hand, Yixing had the idea of cultivating his spear skills. Although his archery skills were very good, if he lost his bow and arrow, his strength would be greatly reduced. The bow and arrow should be used as a trump card. Most of the time, one should rely on one's own strength to fight. Therefore, one's own strength was also very important. If he was strong enough, he wouldn't have been stabbed by Du Bian City's spear today. Yixing's strength wasn't strong, mainly because he had just broken through to the martial saint realm and hadn't cultivated any spiritual level martial arts. If he had, with his talent in martial arts, even if he wasn't as strong as Du Bian City, he should be able to protect himself. Don't waste this good spear. After I become an inner disciple of the I must choose a good spiritual spear technique to learn. Yixing thought to himself as he collected all the spoils of war. Then, Yixing began to repair the formation. Although the coiling snake formation was broken by Du Bian City, he had only damaged a small part of the formation's foundation. In just a quarter of an hour, Yixing had completely repaired the damaged formation's foundation. The coiling snake formation once again enveloped the entire valley. Yixing came to the bottom of the valley again. He had only consumed about half of the star crystal spiritual milk to break through to the star vortex realm. Including the star crystal spiritual milk that Chu Jingwei had absorbed, Yixing had absorbed about a third of it, so there was still about a third left. The star crystal spiritual milk was the purest form of star power and the best treasure to improve one's cultivation. Since there was still some left, Yixing certainly wouldn't miss it. He would only stop after absorbing all of it. Yixing sat down cross-legged beside the star crystal spiritual milk and soon calmed down. Unaffected by the previous battle, he began to cultivate the pure yuan technique. Yixing was surprised to find that after becoming a martial sage, the speed at which he absorbed the star crystal spiritual milk was much faster than when he was a half-step martial sage. It was more than 10 times faster. The star crystal spiritual milk in the pool almost turned into a large white airflow and was directly absorbed by Yixing into the star vortex in Yixing's dantian. This speed was simply too fast. While Yixing was surprised, he was also pleasantly surprised. The great increase in the speed at which he absorbed the star crystal spiritual milk meant that Yixing's cultivation speed had also become faster. Even if there was no star crystal spiritual milk to absorb, Yixing's cultivation speed in the star vortex realm would not be slow. Yixing scanned his body with his super brain and immediately discovered the reason why his cultivation speed had become faster. First, it was because his destiny had improved, which made his cultivation smoother. Of course, this was not the main reason. The improvement of his destiny alone was not enough to increase his cultivation speed to such an extent. The second reason, which was also the main reason, was that Yixing's black hole star vortex had a great effect on absorbing star power. It was more like devouring than absorbing. The black hole star vortex forcibly devoured the star power nearby. It would be strange if the absorption speed was not fast. Under the devouring of the black hole star vortex, the star crystal spiritual milk in the pool was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yixing's cultivation was also increasing rapidly and he was moving towards the second level of the star vortex realm. Chapter 203.Y Yixing's cultivation was already at the peak of the first level of the celestial vortex realm. As he continued to cultivate, it didn't take long for him to reach the critical point of the first level of the celestial vortex realm. Yixing felt that his whole body was filled with pure yuan celestial essence. His body felt like it was about to burst open. He had reached his limit. At this time, Yixing continued to absorb the star crystal spiritual milk. He could no longer improve his celestial essence. Instead, he integrated it all into the black hole star vortex, making the star force in the black hole star vortex stronger and stronger. Finally, at a certain moment, the black hole star vortex absorbed the star force to a certain limit. A change occurred and it directly expanded. With the expansion of the black hole star vortex, Yixing felt that the capacity of his body had increased a lot. The feeling of his body being filled with celestial essence instantly disappeared. Instead, he felt that the celestial essence in his body was somewhat lacking. Of course, Yixing's celestial essence didn't change. What changed was the capacity of his body. For example, a liter of water could be filled to the brim in a 1-liter container. However, if a liter of water was placed in a 10-liter container, it would only fill 1/10 of the container, which seemed very little. The cultivation of the celestial vortex realm was the process of improving the star vortex. As the star vortex expanded, Yixing's cultivation reached the second level of the celestial vortex realm and became a 2-star martial sage. Of course, he could accommodate more celestial essence. Moreover, with the improvement of his cultivation, the quality of his celestial essence also had a qualitative breakthrough. The same amount of celestial essence, in terms of power, was much more powerful than when he was a 1-star martial sage. There was still a small part of the star crystal spiritual milk in the pool. Yixing continued to cultivate the pure yuan technique and constantly absorbed it. Yixing's cultivation speed was too fast. In less than a quarter of an hour, he had absorbed all the star crystal spiritual milk in the pool. His cultivation had already consolidated to the mid-stage of the second level of the celestial vortex realm. Once the star crystal spiritual essence was used up, Yixing stopped cultivating. Although his cultivation speed was very fast, without the star crystal spiritual essence, it was impossible for him to break through one level in a short period of time, so he was not in a hurry. Yixing stood up with an excited smile on his face. He had just broken through the celestial vortex realm and became a martial sage. Then, his cultivation broke through again, becoming a 2-star martial sage. How could Yixing not be happy? He had just become a martial sage, yet he had already broken through to become a 2-star martial sage. Yixing had never heard of such a fast cultivation speed. Even a Taoist or heavenly mandate genius would need several months or even half a year to break through to the next realm in the celestial vortex realm. Zi Shanho was an 8-star martial saint and had broken through to the celestial vortex realm before the age of 17. However, when he entered the clear cloud ancient land at the age of 24, he was only at the 7th level of the celestial vortex realm. On average, he broke through 1 level per year. From this, one could see how fast Yixing had become a 1-star martial sage and a 2-star martial sage on the same day. Originally, even if all the star crystal spiritual essence was absorbed by Yixing, it would still be impossible for his cultivation to break through continuously. The reason why his cultivation could still break through to the second level of the celestial vortex realm even after Chu Jingyue had absorbed 1/3 of the star crystal spiritual essence was because of his black hole astrology. During the period when the black hole astrology was awakened, it had devoured too much astral energy, causing Yixing's cultivation to reach the peak of the first level of the celestial vortex realm. Moreover, the black hole astrology had also raised Yixing's heavenly mandate to a 9-star orange fate. There would be no bottleneck before he reached the 9th level of the celestial vortex realm. As a result, Yixing had absorbed a little more star crystal spiritual essence and naturally broke through to the second level of the celestial vortex realm. Yixing. A loud voice came from outside the canyon. Yixing was delighted to hear that it was his master, Zi Shanho's voice. Although he did not know that Du Bianqing was the #1 inner disciple of the Dongfu sect, he could tell from Du Bianqing's strength that he was definitely an important figure. After killing Du Bianqing, Yixing had been worried that the Dongfu sect would send more powerful martial artists and he would not be able to resist them. Now that Zi Shanho was here, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. In fact, Yixing's worries were not unfounded. Du Bianqing was a genius disciple who was more valued by the Dongfu sect than Zichuanyu. Of course, his body was also engraved with a formation that could detect life auras. The formation master of the Dongfu sect was already aware of Du Bianqing's death. In one day, 2 of the sect's most valued disciples had died, which shocked and angered him. Then, the formation master of the Dongfu sect passed the news to enlightened master Du Bianqing through the communication bead. The communication bead was a bead engraved with a sound transmission formation that could communicate with each other. However, not everyone could use the communication bead. Only enlightened masters who had transformed their celestial essence into astral energy could use it. The communication bead was useless in the hands of martial artists below the enlightened master level. Du Bianqing was Du Bianqing's father and the enlightened master who was in charge of investigating Zichuanyu's death. In the end, before Zichuanyu's death could be found, his genius son had already died. Du Bianying was furious when he heard about Du Bianqing's death. He immediately brought several martial saints with him and charged towards the Kunyan mountain range. Yixing immediately came out of the canyon. After exiting the coiling snake array, he saw Zi Shanho on the back of the purple flame eagle. Chu Jingyue followed Yixing's advice and reported the news to Zi Shanho when they arrived at Zishan County. Zi Shanho knew that Yixing had found a star crystal lode. This was a big news and he immediately rushed to the Kunyan mountain range. The purple flame eagle was faster than the black feather eagle. Before Chu Jingyue returned to the Zi Shanho had already arrived at the Kunyan mountain range. Master! Yixing quickly stepped forward to greet him. Zi Shanho was looking at the snake coiling array with a surprised expression. He did not pay much attention to Yixing. This grade 2 snake coiling array was arranged by you. Yixing nodded, yes. The surprise in Zi Shanho's eyes deepened as he looked at Yixing. You have such a heaven-defying talent in array formations. Zi Shanho knew about Yixing's deeds in the Falling Star sect. He knew that Yixing would go to the Array Source Valley every other day. However, the Array Source Valley was Gu Tianshang's territory and Zi Shanho could not find out what happened there. Zi Shanho had always thought that Yixing was working for Gu Tianshang in the Array Source Valley. Who would have thought that Yixing had learned array formations and had become a grade 2 array master in such a short time? Zi Shanho looked at Yixing. In the blink of an eye, he was shocked again. You're already a 2-star martial saint. Yixing nodded again. Zi Shanho was completely shocked. He had always thought that Yixing would have a bright future. Because of Yixing's performance, his opinion of Yixing had improved again and again. However, he now realized that he had underestimated Yixing. Chu Jingyue had already told Zi Shanho about the situation here. Zi Shanho knew that Yixing had absorbed the star crystal spiritual essence to break through to the martial saint realm. However, Zi Shanho could tell from Chu Jingyue's description that the remaining star crystal spiritual essence was only enough for Yixing to break through to the star vortex realm. His cultivation might be consolidated to the late stage of the first layer, or even the peak, but it was impossible for him to break through to the second layer, which meant that it was impossible for him to become a 2-star martial saint. However, Yixing had already become a 2-star martial saint. Yixing knew that the increase in his cultivation was very shocking, and Zi Shanho was someone he trusted. Perhaps he could ask Zi Shanho for advice. Yixing said, Master, the astrology I awakened is a bit special. When I awakened my astrology, my cultivation soared rapidly. The moment I broke through to the star vortex realm, my cultivation reached the peak of the first level. Therefore, I absorbed the remaining star crystal spiritual essence and broke through to the second level of the star vortex realm. Master, is there any astrology that can speed up my cultivation and improve my cultivation? Zi Shanho shook his head and said, What astrology did you awaken? Show me. Yixing immediately released the black hole astrology. He felt that his surroundings had turned into a world of darkness, and the darkness was like his sense of touch. He could clearly feel any movement in all directions. He could even feel a few ants crawling on the ground. However, Zi Shanho, who was in front of Yixing, did not feel anything strange. In his eyes, the outline of a huge dark star above Yixing's head was unreal. Other than that, he did not feel anything else. This is your astrology, a dark star. I have never seen or heard of it before. This astrology can actually increase cultivation. How strange. Zi Shanho observed Yixing's astrology for a while and sighed. This time, it was Yixing's turn to be surprised. Master, you can see me. Zi Shanho said, Of course I can. Did you think you were invisible? Yixing said, That's not right. When I was fighting with someone just now, I used the black hole astrology. My opponent could not see me. Master, why don't you try attacking me? Oh. Zi Shanho's expression changed. Let me try. Then, he lightly struck out with his palm. Chapter 204. Although it was a light palm, a strong wind blew, and the terrifying power was like an avalanche, slapping towards Yixing. Yixing scanned the trajectory of Zi Shanho's attack, but the latter's attack was too fierce and too fast. Even if he knew, he could not dodge it in time. In an instant, Yixing was sent flying by a terrifying force. However, Zi Shanho's palm strike was skillfully executed. Even though Yixing was sent flying by the force of the palm strike, he was completely unharmed. Master, can you still see me? Yixing flew back dozens of meters and asked immediately after landing. On the back of the purple flame eagle, Zi Shanho nodded, I can see you. Yixing's eyes lit up, and he instantly reacted. Since other people's attacks were not affected by the black hole astrology, it must be when he attacked others that others would be affected. Yixing raised his hand, and the spirit inscription bow and blue sandalwood arrow suddenly appeared in his hands. He knocked an arrow on the bow and pointed it at Zi Shanho. A sharp aura locked onto Zi Shanho. Master, what now? Yixing asked. In an instant, Zi Shanho's perception changed. Suddenly, the sky seemed to be covered by a pitch-black curtain. The whole world turned into darkness, and he couldn't even see his own fingers in front of him. The surrounding dark world suddenly reminded Zi Shanho of the previous dark world, and Yixing had just broken through to the martial saint realm and awakened his astrology. Obviously, there must be a connection between the two. Perhaps it was because of Yixing's astrology awakening that the world turned dark. Yixing immediately channeled his celestial essence into his eyes, raising his eyesight to the limit. The eyesight of a peak martial saint was amazing, and he could see through the darkness. The surrounding scene was vaguely imprinted in his eyes, and even Yixing could see a hazy figure in the distance. Although the effect of Yixing's black hole astrology was heaven-defying, his own cultivation was still too low. He was only at the second level of the celestial vortex realm, a full 7 levels below Zi Shanho. Even the black hole astrology could not bridge the gap of 7 levels. Therefore, Zi Shanho pushed his vision to the limit and vaguely saw through the darkness caused by the black hole astrology. Immediately, a layer of azure light appeared in Zi Shanho's eyes. Using the azure cloud eye, his eyesight instantly increased by more than 10 times. The surrounding darkness could no longer obstruct Zi Shanho's eyes, and he could see everything clearly. Zi Shanho said, Your astrology is indeed miraculous, it really did bring me into a world of darkness. Everything around me was pitch black. Obviously, the turning of the heavens and earth into darkness was related to the awakening of your astrology. However, the power of the astrology is closely related to the cultivation level of a martial artist. Although your astrology is powerful, your cultivation level is still too far from mine. Although the world of darkness can affect me, the effect is not very big. I can only vaguely see it if I push my eyesight to the limit, and if I use my green eyes, I can see even more clearly. As he spoke, Zi Shanho's tone changed, and, because your cultivation level is too far away from mine, even if my astrology is not as good as yours, it is enough to break through the effects of your astrology. After saying this, the azure light in Zi Shanho's eyes retreated, and his eyesight returned to normal. His surroundings once again turned into darkness, but suddenly, a flaming star drilled out from the space between his eyebrows and rose into the sky. This was Zi Shanho's astrology, a star of the fire attribute, and the flames were extremely fierce. Once the flaming star appeared, in an instant, the scorching light dispelled the darkness of the black hole astrology, illuminating the surroundings as if it was daytime. This was different from the green eyes seeing through the darkness, but the flaming star dispelled the darkness. When Zishan-ho used his green eyes to see the surroundings clearly, the darkness still existed, and Yixing could still feel everything in all directions through the darkness. However, once Zishan-ho's flame astral aspect was unleashed, the darkness disappeared, and Yixing also lost his sense of touch. Yixing tested the effects of the black hole astrology, and found that it would only appear when he attacked others. He then stored the black hole astrology into the space between his eyebrows. Although Zishan-ho had completely broken through his astrology, Yixing was not the least bit unhappy. He was in the second stage of the celestial vortex realm, while Zishan-ho was in the 9th stage. There was a difference of 7 stages between their cultivation levels. Not to mention the black hole astrology, even if the black hole astrology and the Sagittarius constellation were added together, it would still be impossible to make up for the difference of 7 stages. Being completely broken by Zishan-ho was a matter of course. It was not that Yixing's astrology was not strong enough, but that his cultivation level was too low compared to Zishan-ho's. Zishan-ho also stored the flaming star into the space between his eyebrows, and continued, "Yixing, there is a principle that you should know: the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. If a person is too outstanding, there will be more disasters. Because, in this world, there are too many people who are jealous and envious of you. Your astrology is extraordinary, and very special. I'm afraid it is not inferior to the constellation astrology, which is known as the strongest astrology. If people know about it, it is inevitable that there will be experts who will have evil intentions towards you. Therefore, your astrology must not be revealed to anyone. Unless absolutely necessary, do not use it. Once you use it, do not leave anyone alive to prevent the other party from revealing your secret." Yixing nodded. This disciple understands. Of course, he knew that the black hole astrology was extraordinary. Because he trusted Zishan-ho, Yixing spoke bluntly to him. To other people, Yixing would not reveal the problem of his astrology. Furthermore, the black hole astrology's ability to devour heavens was too abnormal. With this ability, in theory, as long as there was a genius with a high heavens will in the world, then Yixing would have the hope of obtaining that high heavens will. This was an ability that could deprive others of their heavens will. It could deprive all the geniuses of their heavens will for their own use. It was truly heaven-defying. This was something that even Zishan-ho did not dare to say. Yixing asked again, "Master, is it possible for a martial artist to have 2 astrology? The same person having 2 astrology? This is unheard of." Zishan-ho smiled faintly. He originally wanted to say that it was unheard of, but suddenly realized that Yixing's question was a bit strange. Everything was fine, why would Yixing ask such a question? Could it be? Zishan-ho immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Even though he felt that it was impossible to have 2 astrology, he still rationally realized that since Yixing asked such a question, it was very likely that he had encountered such a situation. Seeing the change in Zishan-ho's expression, Yixing knew that the former had already guessed it. With a thought, Yixing moved the Sagittarius constellation out from between his eyebrows. In an instant, a bow and arrow floated in the air above Yixing. This was an incomparably huge bow and arrow, formed by the convergence of countless stars. It looked incomparably magnificent and shocking. Sagittarius constellation, you really have 2 astrology. Zishan-ho could no longer remain calm as he cried out in surprise. Yixing's body had produced too many miracles, again and again shocking Zishan-ho. Some things that were slightly difficult to accept, Zishan-ho was already used to Yixing. However, this time, Zishan-ho was still deeply shocked. Firstly, Yixing really had 2 astrology, which broke the common sense of martial arts. Secondly, Yixing's other astrology was actually a constellation astrology, and it was the strongest astrology for archery martial artists, Sagittarius constellation. Zishan-ho himself was an archery martial artist, and his archery skills were very high. The Sagittarius constellation was the ultimate desire of archery martial artists. To an archery martial artist, possessing the Sagittarius constellation was the best condition to learn archery. Zi Shanho looked at Yi Xing and exclaimed, "Yi Xing, you will definitely become an archery expert in the future. You will definitely be an influential figure in the star continent. No, you will even be the overlord of the star continent." Recalling that Yi Xing had 2 astrology, as well as a black hole astrology that did not increase attack power but had an incomparably heaven-defying supportive effect, Zi Shanho immediately changed his tone. Among the martial artists of the star continent, kings stood at the peak. What kind of existence was the overlord of the star continent? Dominating among kings, wouldn't that be the king of kings? Would Yi Xing become such an existence? In Zi Shanho's opinion, it was possible. The constellation astrology was already the strongest astrology in the legends. It was unknown how many years it would take for one to appear in the star continent. As long as it matured, the martial artist with the constellation astrology was already the strongest existence. As for the double astrology, that had not even appeared in the legends. A single astrology was already so abnormal. With 2 super strong astrology in one person's body, as long as there was enough time to grow, wouldn't he become the king of kings in the future? Absolutely. Zi Shanho's confidence at this moment was incomparably firm. Please brothers, please give me 10 monthly votes. Chapter 205. Yi Xing, you can't reveal your Sagittarius constellation astrology. If people know about your black hole astrology, most people won't know what kind of astrology it is. Maybe they won't have any evil intentions towards you. But if they know that you have Sagittarius constellation astrology, there will definitely be a large number of experts, even venerables and king-level experts, who will want to kill you. Zi Shanho solemnly warned Yi Xing constellation astrology was known as the strongest astrology. The number of martial artists who had constellation astrology was even rarer than those who had King's Mandate. In the Star Continent, although King's Mandate martial artists were extremely rare, 1 in 100 years, constellation astrology was 1 in 10,000 years. The difference between the two was 100 times. Even venerable realm cultivators would attract the killing intent of countless people. The situation of king realm cultivators was even more serious. As for constellation astrology martial artists, it was even more likely that countless experts would want to kill them in the cradle. Although there would also be experts who wanted to protect these martial artists who would have great achievements in the future, the number of experts who wanted to kill them in the cradle was much more. Therefore, constellation astrology must not be revealed. Yi Xing nodded. In his heart, he was even more determined to improve his hard strength. What was hard strength? It was the true strength of a martial artist without using the power of constellation. If constellation astrology couldn't be revealed, it meant that Yi Xing could only use hard strength in most cases, and not the power of constellation. And if one wanted to be strong, the first thing was to have a strong celestial essence. Yi Xing did well on this point. The spiritual martial inheritance he cultivated was the pure Yuan technique. The strength of his pure Yuan celestial essence was far stronger than ordinary celestial essence. It was even stronger than celestial essence. Yi Xing was now at the middle of the second level of the celestial vortex realm, but the strength of his celestial essence was enough to defeat all 2-star martial saints. He could even compete with 3-star martial saints. However, his martial arts were somewhat inferior. He had not cultivated any spiritual level martial arts. The extreme level martial arts were still considered normal ordinary martial arts. Even if he cultivated it to the transformation realm, it would not be comparable to spiritual level martial arts. At most, it would be comparable to beginner spiritual martial arts. If it was at the initial completion stage, it would be enough to easily crush a transcendent stage martial arts. If it was at the great completion stage, its power would be even more terrifying. Therefore, Yixing wanted to strengthen his cultivation of martial arts. He would be qualified to learn it once he became an inner sect disciple of the Starfall sect. Furthermore, as long as he could protect this starry crystal lode, it would belong to the Falling Star sect in the end. He would receive 10,000 sect contribution points. By then, he would be able to learn any spiritual martial arts he wanted. Zishanho dismounted from the purple flame eagle's back and walked towards Yixing, his wooden legs making thumping sounds on the ground. Walking in front of Yixing, Zishanho raised his hand and a secret manual appeared. With your talent in archery, I will not teach you the low-level spiritual martial arts. I will teach you the middle-level spiritual martial arts 4 symbols arrow technique. While speaking, Zishanho handed the secret manual in his hand to Yixing. The words 4 symbols arrow technique were written on the manual. Thank you, Master. Yixing took the 4 symbols arrow technique and said with joy. This was a middle-level spiritual martial art. Its power was unimaginable. Zishanho explained, the 4 symbols arrow technique, other than the basic arrow moves, only has 4 arrow moves. They are the Azure Dragon arrow move, White Tiger arrow move, Vermilion Bird arrow move, and Black Tortoise arrow move. Among them, the Black Tortoise arrow move is a defensive arrow move and the Vermilion Bird arrow move can be used at the entry level. The Vermilion Bird arrow move is an offensive arrow move. To train this arrow move, you need to absorb the star power of the fire attribute. The White Tiger's arrow style and the Azure Dragon's arrow style were both offensive arrow styles. The White Tiger's arrow style required the user to cultivate the 4 symbols archery technique to minor accomplishment before it could be used. The Azure Dragon's arrow style required the user to cultivate the 4 symbols archery technique to great accomplishment before it could be used. The Azure Dragon arrow move shot from the completion level of the 4 symbols arrow technique could even force a true master who had just entered the astral realm to retreat. Its power is even stronger than an entry-level upper-level spiritual martial art. Yixing said with surprise, the difference between the middle-level spiritual martial art and the upper-level spiritual martial art is so big. Only the completion level of the middle-level spiritual martial art is slightly stronger than an entry-level upper-level spiritual martial art. If it was a normal ordinary martial technique, a middle-rank martial technique at the great accomplishment stage would be equivalent to a upper-rank martial technique at the small accomplishment stage. Compared to a upper-rank martial technique at the entry stage, it was much stronger. Zishanho said, that's right, the difference in power between the different grades of spiritual martial force is huge. Because the 4 symbols arrow technique is an archery technique, only after reaching the great completion stage can it surpass a beginner upper spiritual martial force. If it were a normal middle spiritual martial force, the great completion stage can only match the power of an upper spiritual martial force. After a pause, Zishanho concluded, an upper-tier spiritual martial force is equivalent to an upper-tier spiritual martial force at the entry level. An upper-tier spiritual martial force at the completion level is equivalent to an upper-tier spiritual martial force at the entry level. An upper-tier spiritual martial force at the completion level is equivalent to an extreme-tier spiritual martial force at the entry level. The difference between the spiritual martial force and the Xian martial force is even greater. Even a complete stage of the extreme-tier spiritual martial force may not be comparable to a lower Xian martial force at the entry level. Hearing this, Yixing understood. It seems that above ordinary martial arts, every time a martial art is one level higher, its value will be many times more valuable. It is on a completely different level. Take the lower-tier spiritual martial force and the middle-tier spiritual martial force as an example. 2 martial saints of the same level, one of them practiced the lower-tier spiritual martial force for many years and finally reached the upper-tier spiritual martial force. The other one practiced the middle-tier spiritual martial force and reached the initial-tier spiritual martial force in a few years. If these 2 martial saints of the same level were to fight, regardless of their astrological power, the martial saint of the initial tier spiritual martial force would beat the martial saint of the upper tier spiritual martial force to the initial tier spiritual martial force. Spending less time, at a lower level, but possessing more power. This was the advantage of higher-level martial arts. Most martial saints only had the opportunity to learn the lower-tier spiritual martial force at the first few levels of the Star Vortex realm. Yi Xing had just become a martial saint and could already learn the middle-tier spiritual martial force, for Symbol's arrow technique. Most warriors did not have such an opportunity. Naturally, Yi Xing was very happy. Just as Yi Xing was about to open the for Symbol's arrow technique, Zi Shanhou stopped him. Don't look at it now. Trouble is coming. Zi Shanhou's eyes shone with a layer of green light as he looked into the distance. Yi Xing put away the for Symbol's arrow technique and looked into the distance. Following Zi Shanhou's gaze, a layer of green light also appeared in his eyes. With the evolution of the superbrain, Yi Xing could see further and further. Even his green eyes had improved a lot. About 20 miles away, 6 birds were flying towards them. The leading one was a purple flame eagle and the other 5 were black feather eagles. On the back of the purple flame eagle sat a middle-aged man who looked to be about 30 years old. His aura was overwhelming. Even from afar, Yi Xing's heart could not help but jump. This was definitely a terrifying expert. As for the other 5 black feather eagles, their auras were also surging. Obviously, their strength was not ordinary. Yi Xing felt that each of these 5 people was stronger than Dubian City. Zi Shanhou glanced at them and said, "Don't use the green eyes to look. The enlightened master's vision is very strong and his senses are very sensitive. Don't let him find out that you have the azure cloud eyes." As he spoke, the green light in Zi Shanhou's eyes disappeared. Yi Xing was surprised. Enlightened Master. The enlightened master Zi Shanhou was talking about was obviously the middle-aged man who looked to be about 30 years old. This was the first enlightened master Yi Xing had seen. The green light in Yi Xing's eyes disappeared. Even without the green eyes, he could still see into the distance and pay attention to the traces of the other party. Yi Xing said worriedly, "Master, there is an enlightened master and the other 5 must be extremely powerful martial saints. How can we stop them?" "Don't be afraid." Zi Shanhou simply spat out 2 words, his tone was very confident. He moved forward and stopped the group 2 miles away from the canyon. Yi Xing followed closely behind. Hua Tianfeng. Du Bianing obviously knew Zi Shanhou. When he saw Zi Shanhou, he said his name. "It was you who killed my Qing." His voice was filled with anger and his eyes were fierce as if he wanted to bite someone. Zi Shanhou did not see the corpses of Du Bian City and the others in the coiling snake array. He only knew from Chu Jinghua that Yi Xing had used the level 2 coiling snake array to kill Zi Chuanyu, an inner disciple of the Dong Fu sect. With the help of the black feather eagle, he had also used his archery skills to kill 4 other inner disciples of the Dong Fu sect. Hearing Du Bianying's words, Zi Shanhou was surprised again. Did Yi Xing also kill Du Bianying? Du Bianying was the number 1 inner disciple of the Dong Fu sect. He was considered a famous genius in the entire Qingyun area. Zi Shanhou naturally knew about him. "Today is the wedding of my comrade, so I'm a little busy. I'll make up for it tomorrow." You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.